Okay. Check 1, 2, testing. Let me know in the chat how everything sounds, how everything looks. Um, and hopefully it looks good. But I am glad to be back online with you all. And I think we're going to have a good stream tonight. We're not going to do a commentary. We're going to actually do kind of an AMA, Ask Me Anything, but uh, specifically trying to address questions that are those age-old, seemingly unanswerable questions that everybody has, continued to ask at least throughout my lifetime and before, and also it seems like a lot of people are very confident in their answers, and but also none of them ever get adopted because people don't have the best explanations for those answers always. So we're going to try and answer some of those, and we're going to look at it within the context of sentient singularity theory, and we're going to talk about why a lot of these questions have not been answered. But I am going to be taking, questions from you guys. If you have one, please put it in the live chat, and I'd be happy to discuss it. If you have any questions about how sentient singularity theory can be used to answer a specific question that you have on your mind, if you have any questions that about sentient singularity theory, then just put them in the chat, and I'm happy to discuss them. Please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. Share this if you are watching this later. I mean, I guess you could share it now too. You don't know if it's good yet, but hopefully, I don't know. Take a leap of faith with me. Hopefully it's good. But like I said, please hit the like button. It really helps. And let me know in the live chat how everything sounds and how the stream looks. So if you're not familiar with this channel, which I'm sure most of you are, I have an attempt at a foundational metaphysical framework of cosmology, essentially, called Sentient Singularity Theory. It's also essentially a theory of consciousness. And so it is a theory about ourselves, about sentient beings, all sentient beings, and how each one fits into the evolutionary chain of the cosmos, and also how we navigate and orient and sense make as we, make the observations that we make and feel the feelings that we feel. And so anything that's relevant to that, which is pretty much everything, go ahead and feel free to put it into the live chat. I have a eyelash in my eye. Okay, so I'm going to try and ignore that. But the reason why I wanted to discuss this is, for one, I'm trying to get some practice talking more about a lot of these questions in the context of sentient singularity theory. Even though I've thought a lot about these things, I've talked a lot about them on here, obviously. I want to really, this year, take the specificity and the coherence of explanations for some of these relevant questions, and also for some of the models in sentient singularity theory up quite a number of notches. And so that's this is kind of a working session, but it's also just know that when I'm talking about the answers to many of these questions that I've already got written down, these are not questions that I thought of tonight. These are questions that I have been rigorously examining and trying to contextualize for quite a number of years. And I would say that I haven't really in the last few years had any new breakthroughs with some of these that is truly dramatic, which is a good thing, because it means that sentient singularity theory's models seem to actually be easily applied and to many of these questions, and that they were just answered prior to the last few years or so. But talking about them and explaining them is tough, and part of the reason why is because a lot of our assumptions in our academic sciences and in our metaphysical, you know, uh, assumptions and in our philosophical frameworks and narratives and moral narratives that we have in society are false. They're wrong, fundamentally wrong. And if you have a context that is fundamentally false and that it is therefore fundamentally incoherent, and if it is fundamentally false and incoherent, then it's really hard to use those assumptions in order to extrapolate truths from it, especially really foundational truths, those which are usually the answers that we seek when we're asking a lot of these age-old questions, which are usually bad questions, and that's why we don't answer them, is they're usually the wrong question. And what got me thinking about this was about doing a stream on this is I saw on Kirk Jaimungal's Twitter, he had posted, his an explanation or a kind of a statement about the discussion of whether or not the universe is probabilistic or deterministic. And I actually very much agree with what he had stated, which was that, I mean, we'll probably go over it a little bit, but that that we that we're basically talking about models and we don't actually know which model is correct. And because of that, you can disprove a model, but it doesn't necessarily disprove, an assertion as to the fundamentality of determinism or probability in actuality. And so he was talking about how we have these models, we don't know if they're actually true, and they haven't really been concretely proven. They're just kind of, some of them are assumed to be right by most people in this niche, and then some of them are assumed to be wrong by most people in this niche. This niche, and so that doesn't really help, though, because some of these questions are essential ones for us to answer in order for us to even recognize things as important as a moral framework. And that is an essential thing to recognize. I don't really know of anything more essential to recognize than a moral framework. And this is one of the things about sentient singularity theory that has become probably my main and most and strongest interest in terms of its application, is not how do we get teleportation, even though I think that if that's possible, it's relevant. A number of these more fundamental theories are relevant to that, including sentient singularity theory. But I don't think that that's something that I have any interest in really trying to do, even though it might be possible. Essentially teleportation, faster than light travel, whatever you want to call it. Taking advantage of new degrees of freedom. I don't know how much any of you follows the UFO news from the government, but I know Eric Weinstein talks about how geometric unity might apply to explaining some of the observations of the government of these craft that have been noticed, and that to me is not interesting. It is interesting. It's not critical. I don't think. I don't think it's critical that we escape Earth, and I think it's critical that we understand how to make a good world, no matter where we are. Much more so than it is critical that we figure out how to escape this one, because the reality is what would drive anybody to try and escape this world is humans. I mean, anybody, you listen to Elon Musk and he's like, we need to go to Mars because we need a backup world. And I don't know if we'll ever go to Mars. And we probably will eventually, but I don't know if we'll have a second colony on there. I don't think so. I don't think we need that. they would colonize Antarctica before they colonized Mars. It's much, much easier to live in Antarctica than it is on Mars. But um, and then you have Eric Weinstein, who doesn't think that's far enough, and that we need to really escape and uh, go to, you know, planets in other solar systems and you know, maybe beyond. And I don't see that as a solution either, because anywhere people go, the problems of people will follow. And if if I ever get a chance to have him on here, that is one thing that I would want to discuss with him the most. But you know, I feel like this. I'm just going to be honest. This is just I hope I'm wrong, but I feel like it's possible that we need to go to Mars, and we need to go to another solar system, galaxy, whatever, is kind of, and it could be useful to getting funding. And if that's the case, then, you know, hopefully whoever is involved in those discussions is brave enough to even have the discussion of whether or not, like, that's a necessary thing for us to do. You know, you can still fund missions to Mars, even if it's not like the salvation of humanity. It's still interesting, I guess. By the way, if anybody has not seen the show, what is it called? For All Mankind, I just got caught up on that show. I watched a few episodes of the first season. I was so bored. And then I skipped to the third season because I heard it was much better, and where they're on Mars. It was insane. It was so good. I really recommend watching it. And then I went back and watched the second season, and that was also very good. Fourth season's okay. But it's basically an alternate universe of the space race, where we just keep going to Mars and etc. We don't just stop at the moon, and it's in it, like, the Soviets reach the moon first, but America reaches space first. It's like everything's flipped. It's very, very good though. Like, the suspense in some of these scenes is probably beyond any other show I've ever seen. So they definitely did a good job. But regardless, that's not going to save us. I don't believe. We have to figure out not even how we can make the world good, because I don't think we make the world good. I think the world will be made good. We'll talk about that in the context of Sentient Singularity Theory. But I think we can make our world better. And I'm much more concerned about that. I think that that's a much more productive goal. And it's much more fruitful, I think, and kind of essential than really any piece of technology or new toy. So, but we can still talk about new toys potentially in the context of Sentient Singularity Theory. So, you know, comment them in the chat. What's up, Torin? Whatever UFOs are, it should correlate perfectly to your theory. It's not just going to be the Greys or breakaway civilization descended from Swiss clockmakers or the reptilians. I don't know what it will end up being. I do believe that there is we're seeing things that are real. And I did a stream called UFOs versus Wasps. And you can look it up on the list of live videos on this channel. And I explain my thoughts in more detail on that, and share some interesting videos that I've taken and things like that. But, and that the government has released. It's an interesting topic. But here's another, like, just to kind of add context to this. I got really, really into the topic for a while, and I was like really hoping that at some point we would get to see something that was in the possession of the government. I am not convinced that we are ever able to even get the truth on that topic, because what nobody talks about is everybody says, oh, it's the government. They're hiding everything. Oh, no, it's not the government. It's the corporations. Oh, it's not the corporations or the government. It's the deep state, which is, you know, the Lockheed Martin colluding with the CIA. That is, if this is actually happening, to where like what is happening is that there is technology that is um, different from ours that is being that has been recovered and is being observed. Um, it's not humans who are in charge of the cover up, and it doesn't make the entire like topic doesn't make sense as a global cover up unless there's beings in charge that are way beyond humans and are not human. They're not the Russians colluding with the United States. It's just not. None of that makes any sense. It just doesn't. You cannot have that level of global, I guess, cooperation. I don't think they didn't have it with the atom bomb. Everybody like revealed and stole technology and leaked things, and they couldn't keep the secret forever. And the same thing with every bit of technology that we have, unless it's probably a piece of technology that is purposely being restricted to a small amount of humans by beings that are not human. And that might sound crazy if you're not caught up on like what the government's been talking about, but you can watch the congressional hearings if you'd like. But they're basically stating that there's technology out there that isn't from our civilization. And I do believe that that's true. But I think that there are people in charge of the cover up are not just, it's not just the government. They might be working to cover it up. They're not the ones in charge. And that makes me think you'll never find out the truth about it, no matter what the government says. Or even if Grays landed on the White House lawn tomorrow and told us, a bunch of things, I don't think that you should believe them. So, just that's my opinion. I don't know. It's a frustrating topic, but it's one that I've kind of given up trying to understand the truth of, and really given up any hope of like honest disclosure. It's not going to happen. That doesn't mean they're not going to tell us some things, but just expect. I think it makes sense to expect that whatever they tell us is going to be misleading, to some degree, But how is okay? I think more likely the atom bomb is what they want you to know about. Yeah, I mean, I think that they can't hide that one. I don't think that one matters in terms of it's not a different tech tree from our current technology. But if you can jump between physical locations and go 10,000 miles an hour, whatever they're observing, that's a different capability that is not probably going to be allowed to ever be dispersed among humanity freely. They might be giving it to 20, 30 people who agree to go along with the cover up. But that's it. Unless you're on the inside, you will never be allowed to know it all. And you're not on the inside unless you're the beings that are not human. That's what I think. You're just not on the inside otherwise. I think even the idea that these are from space is probably lies that they want us to believe. Just my thoughts. But anyways, not to get too much into the weeds. But I want to talk about these questions though that are kind of these age-old questions. There's a few of them I have on a list here. Put yours in the chat if you would like to discuss it. But one of them is, we're going to start with the probabilistic versus deterministic universe. We'll talk about free will versus determinism. We're going to talk about when did life begin. We're going to talk about the definition of life. We're going to talk about what is the meaning of life. That is a question. Why that's a terrible question. Trying to figure out whether or not existence is fundamentally consciousness or fundamentally matter, or if the universe is fundamentally material versus fundamentally mind, is kind of the wrong question. And we're going to also talk about human social dynamics and what it means to be, if we have time, leader versus, submissive and things like that, and different types of human relationships. And there are certain discussions that I've had recently that kind of spurred this one as well. And it kind of made me realize that we have some false assumptions and bad goals when it comes to defining some of these things, especially gender dynamics. I will say regarding gender dynamics, I am planning to do a live stream discussion possibly this Sunday, but I will keep people updated and I will post it to this channel when it happens. It might not be posted here live. It's probably going to be on my Theory of Everyone Instagram live on Sunday, which if you're not following me on there, please do. I haven't posted in a while, but I will pick it back up. This is where the most meaningful content is, but it's an interesting follow still. But I will be doing probably the live discussion with Will Roosh, who is a former civics teacher, high school civics teacher, who I've had discussions with before about political and social issues, and he's kind of dedicated to trying to improve our teaching methods to help kids learn how to think instead of being force-fed information out of context to memorize. And so that's a mission that's extremely near and dear to my heart, and my experience and my pursuits with Sentient Singularity Theory as well, and my experience with school. So I'm very supportive of that. But he's a very good thinker, and I've had good discussions with him before. So we're going to be talking about the language of gender, marriage, and sexual orientation, things like that. It's kind of issues that are kind of more controversial topics, to say the least. But I will post the stream on here after it is done. But if you want to watch it live and ask questions or anything like that, you can follow me on Instagram, and I will keep you guys updated when it's going to happen, but I think Sunday evening. So let's go here. So there is this idea in this discussion in physics of whether or not the universe is deterministic or whether or not you have free will. And there's also a kind of parallel discussion of, is the universe deterministic or is it probabilistic? These are two questions that both are wrong, and they're closely tied. They're bad. When I say both are wrong, they are bad questions, meaning the assumptions that are built into the question itself are false. That's what it means to have a bad question, is that you can't answer it. What is how did life begin? Bad question. There's assumptions built into the question that are false. I'm claiming they're false. If sentient singularity theory is false, then, I don't know, then I'm wrong. But I doubt it. At least the core assumption. That doesn't mean everything I say is right. But that's what I mean by bad question. And these questions are kind of usually never ending in our discussions, partially because two reasons. One, they are essential enough to where what we are seeking in the answer to these questions is essential, and we know it, so we keep trying to get the answer. That doesn't mean that the question is the right question. It means that we're trying to get a specific answer, and this is the question that we currently think, with our default assumptions, is the right question to ask in order to get that answer. Okay, so the other reason why it's endless is because, like I said before, there are assumptions built into these questions into the structure and to the assertions within these questions that are false. So if you have that happen, you're going to endlessly discuss it because you definitely need the answer that you're seeking, and you know it intuitively, logically, consciously, unconsciously, emotionally, all these different reasons. You know it. Like, what is the meaning of life? There is an answer to that you are seeking with that question that is not an answer that is directly to that question, but it is an answer that we're trying to get with that question. And if the question is phrased incorrectly, or it's built on false assumptions, you'll never get that answer that you're seeking, but you will always seek it. That's what makes these questions an age-old question. But I don't think that these questions, or really any question, has to be an age-old question. I actually think every single question is answerable. That doesn't mean you are able to get the answers. It means that eventually the answer, if you're not able to get it, if you were around long enough, you would be able to perceive that question be answered, whether it's answered by the universe, God, technology, whatever. There, you will eventually, I think every question will eventually be answered that is currently asked. That doesn't mean that the world is going to be pointless after that, though, either. I think that trying to get the answers to questions, these fundamental questions, is they're not questions that are meant to be endless. They are questions that we really need the answers to in order to figure out the daily pursuits. And there's always going to be new questions about, regarding specific circumstances, and regarding your passions or your interests or whatever, and that's good. But these contextualizing questions of morals and of purpose and of life and of the cosmos and creation, all of these things, these are not meant to be questions that we always have. People think or they say that that's the case, of like, oh, how boring if we finally figured out the origin of life, and we finally figured out the meaning of life, and we finally figured out whether or not the universe is deterministic, or whether or not we have free will. That just makes life so boring. No, it doesn't. It definitely does not. It actually makes life much more interesting because you can make progress on things that you are stumped on. But I think people just say that because they can't answer these questions, and so they just try and romanticize the fact that they can't answer them. And there's nothing romantic about not knowing, like, whether or not life is meaningful. That's not romantic. You can know the meaning of, you can know the answer to the question that we are seeking, the answer we are seeking when we ask the question, what is the meaning of life, and still have an entire lifetime of you exploring your specific contribution to the world. I mean, that doesn't go away. So I just want to say that beforehand. So let me sign in. I'm pulling up the Twitter question. Okay. So Kurt asked, or he said, no one has ever established, this is it, I'll show it. No one has ever established whether the universe is fundamentally deterministic or probabilistic. This is one of those strange counterintuitive facts that change the way you view reality, not just physics. Once you comprehend it, it's similar to how it's counterintuitive that you feel that your feeling of weight is actually never due to pure gravity. Instead, it's due to electromagnetism. Why? While the equations of classical mechanics are deterministic, this determinism isn't directly testable as an empirical proposition about the reality itself. You can't conclusively rule out hidden non-deterministic factors in actual physical systems through experiment alone. Any observed agreement with deterministic equations might also be explained by suitable probabilistic theories that mimic determinism within experimental error. Hence the claim that determinism in classical mechanics is a metaphysical add-on and not a directly falsifiable statement. Strictly speaking, you can test whether classical mechanics predictions match observations, but testing whether the universe truly is deterministic goes beyond just verifying the equation's predictive success. He's right. Similarly, for so-called random systems, any observed randomness could still be deterministic in some hidden way if measurements match a probabilistic model that doesn't exclude an undiscovered deterministic theory that mimics those probabilities. Stating whether something is deterministic or probabilistic is mostly an unfalsifiable statement at this point. You can disconfirm models, not metaphysics. I agree with, a lot of what he just said there. And what I said is I realized I was going to try and just give my thoughts on this, because these are things that I think about, that I've thought about for years now. And what is probability? And I loved studying. I took a class in college that was it was just a stats class of some type, and it was very focused on probability, and it was something that it was a subject that I was very good at, and I got an A in the class, and so I understand probability decently enough. I'm not going to say that there aren't equations that people will cite as being like the backbone of probability. I don't think that if they said that, they actually are focusing on the most important thing here. I'm not saying that that there aren't equations that I don't know. There certainly are, but that's not the point. As Kurt said, that you kind of need to go beyond equations. Said, but testing whether the universe truly is deterministic goes beyond just verifying the equation's predictive success. Exactly. And so it's not just about equations. It is about a context for those equations. And what I realized when I was posting my comment below, which I did, you can go look at it, is that I had to explain the base premise of my metaphysical framework that I was looking at this through in order to even start to give context to the answers that I was proposing. And I know a lot of people will say things like, oh, or they'll feel. And I'm guilty of this too. When somebody tells me, oh, I've figured it all out, I'm like, maybe, I do actually usually take them a little bit more seriously than most, because I'm guilty of of usually making similar claims, but just in probably a more coherent way than most people who make those types of claims. But it's not that that doesn't mean I dive too deep into what they're stating. Sometimes I do, but usually I don't, just because I have my own work and I have a daughter and limited time. I have a toddler. That will limit your time. But it doesn't mean that I dismiss them because I think they're nuts. I don't think that that's true, even if they're wrong. Even if I'm wrong, it doesn't mean I'm nuts. I hate that phrase. Calling people crazy is just useless. And it's usually incorrect, but I think it's probably actually always incorrect. But regardless, another time. I realized I couldn't just be like, actually, this and this and this. Like, I had to give a cosmological framework in order to start explaining myself in this when it comes to these specific questions and these specific concepts, like probability, like like determinism. And I would say that the question, not even I would say, I'm going to try and explain. Let's come up with a goal so that I don't ramble too much. The goal with this question is regarding this question is I'm going to try and explain the context and an explanation regarding free will, determinism, and probability, because they are all interconnected. That's why people say, is the universe free? Do you have free will, or is the universe deterministic? And then there's that parallel question of, is the universe probabilistic or deterministic? And I think that there's a reason why we even have to use, why we might always have to use probability as a tool, even if it is not fundamentally true, a true property of the universe. And even if we knew all that we could know about the nature and structure of the universe, I still think that we might have to use a probabilistic model in order to make predictions about it. And so that's what my goal is. I'm going to go to the chat and then we'll come back to that. Hold me to that so I don't go on tangents. Okay. How is DeepSeek already recognizing emotions and feelings? Oh man, we're going to talk about AI. I don't know how much we're going to talk about that tonight though. But I have the answer. I am only sharing with you the question. Oh, so boring. Another channel with endless monologue. So leave. So leave. Like, what are you doing here? I would not waste my time on a boring channel. That sounds very, very illogical. Don't waste your time with this channel if you think that what I'm saying is boring. Sometimes it is boring. Sometimes it's probably even boring for people who don't think my work is boring. But if you think my work is boring too, just leave. I don't say that like dismissively. Like it's a recommendation for your sake. I don't care. I mean, I'll take the views, but you are the one who is giving me your time, and you don't think it's worth it. So what are you doing? Okay. Yeah, the answer, it's 42. Well, that's funny. We'll talk about that. You're boring, Kramos. I know. Sometimes I'm boring, but if you think the work is boring, don't waste your time. So first we have to go to the context of sentient singularity theory, which I did fix my website last week. So if you go to writings, you will get a poetic description of existence and the technical description of existence. This is necessary in order to understand why I'm going to give the answers that I'm going to give. That doesn't mean I'm right. It just means like, understand that this is the context that I am operating from. Okay. And otherwise you're just going to think that you're not going to understand why I have even made the statements that I have, I'm going to make. So sentient singularity theory describes the totality of existence as a singularity of sentience, aka sentient being, that is creating additional sentient singularities within itself, aka additional sentient beings within itself. That is what is the most important context. And the reason why that this has to be the context is because it's not that it has to be the context, it's that you have to assume that that's the context. Because when you ask yourself, what is the first question of any question, of all questions, the answer is the same for you as it is for me, as it is for a fish. The answer is, what is the first question? That's the answer to the first question. And it answers itself with itself. It's just this kind of recursive loop that you get stuck in. And then in order to break that symmetry, you have to personalize it and contextualize it with yourself. And so you have to say, what is the truest thing that I know? Okay. What is the thing that I must assume to be true more so than and trust to be true more so than I trust anything else to be true? And the answer is also built into the question, because you say, what is the truest thing that I know? And the answer is I am. That's it. You know that you exist. So what is your nature? Sentience. That's what you know about the nature of existence more truly than you know anything else. And if you assume the opposite, you're actually not thinking logically. You got confused and took a wrong turn. And I understand that because I did that for most of my life. But it's because when you look at a pen, you're like, that's not sentient. But that's not the point. You are still in this observation too. So you can't make an observation that is absent yourself. So there's never an instance in which sentience is not the primary medium of your observation. It's just not, doesn't exist. The most accurate way of describing the implications of that is not that means that existence is sentient. It means what it is that it means you must assume it is sentient. And what you must assume is as good as you're going to get. And honestly, it's exactly what you should assume. So I understand like people be like, well, that you might have to assume that that's the case, but maybe that's not the case. It's like, as soon as you do that, you're no longer assuming that that's the case. And you've just stopped thinking logically. You're just like, oh, well, maybe what everything I know is, maybe everything and anything that I know, I don't actually know. And so good luck trying to reconcile that logic. You'll fall apart. But this is the context. And if this is the context, then we have to recognize that sentience, that we're inside of we have to assume we're inside of a giant sentient being. Existence itself is a single giant mind. And you are a mind within that mind, and so am I, and we are interacting and within that mind. And we have minds within us as well. They're called cells, and they have minds within them, and they have minds within them, and they have minds within them. And there is this nested quasi-periodic fractal pattern of this chain of sentience that goes, that has always been present, or at least that goes all the way back to the creation of multiplicity. But sentience has always been present, and you must assume that it has always been present. You must assume that logically. I believe that. If you don't believe that I'm right, comment in the chat your logic to your argument. But I don't think that, I mean, I invite you to challenge it, but I've good luck. But really try. I'm not trying to dissuade you from trying. Actually try it. If I'm wrong, I want to know. But this context is the context of physics. It is the context of math. It is the context of information. It is the context of morality. It is the context of politics. It is the context of biology. It is the context of chemistry. And so when we're thinking about whether or not choice exists, or whether or not existence is deterministic, or whether or not it's probabilistic, this is the context. Nested, interacting sentient beings. And that's it. There is no non-sentient things that matter yet. Because those non-sentient things are within the context of sentient beings. And so the sentient beings that are interacting and nested within each other, that's the context that we need to focus on. That is not the current context of our academic assumptions. And it is assumed that the universe and the observations that we see are fundamentally probabilistic or fundamentally deterministic, because no matter what, it is assumed that choice of structures beyond us, like the universe itself, like atoms themselves, like molecules themselves, like protons and neutrons themselves, are not able to make choices. And if that's the case, then you can't actually ever just have a framework that is compatible with the concept of choice, despite that being our experience in our life. Everybody thinks that they have the ability to make choices, and I do think that everybody has the ability to make choices. It doesn't mean that everything that you think is a choice is a choice. That's not true, and I've talked about that on the recent stream on free will that I did. But you do have the ability to choose a goal. That is, your actions are sometimes governed by instincts, but your goals are chosen by you, and or they can be chosen by you. And so that's at least how we feel. And if we deny that, then we're denying everything that we could, that we could or currently do, or could ever possibly know. Like, because we're basically denying our own selfhood, because you're denying your the reality of you, or you are denying your internal experience as true. Which, if that's the case, then you can't use your internal experience to make sense of the world. So just give up, and like, you won't even be able to give up, because you just can't think at this point. But it's like when people say, "Oh, it's all meaningless. Like, might as well just end it." It's like, well, if it's meaningless, why end it? It's like, why do anything? It's because the framework of everything and everyone and meaning itself falls apart in some of these flawed fundamental assumptions. But when you think that there's no choice involved in the universe, you have to believe that its existence is fundamentally deterministic or fundamentally probabilistic. And that's why the question is even there. This false question of, is it probabilistic or is it deterministic? It's like, probability is a tool. Like, think about a jar of marbles, okay? And there's like a valve or a door at the bottom that you can open, and there in it there's a set amount of green marbles. Let's say there's there's 66 green marbles, and there are 33 red marbles, and there's 99 marbles in this jar total. And you can't see, though, through the jar. The jar is covered. It's not glass. You can't see inside it. But you can open a door at the bottom and a marble will come out. And you have to try and guess what marble will come out. This is a very easy example, but that's good because it makes it easier to explain. You can use probability to make a prediction about what color that marble will be. It's 66% that it will be a red marble, and it is, or 66% that it would be green marble, and 33% that it would be a red marble. I think that's what I had said. And that is a prediction. But if you actually looked inside the jar, you would see which marble is right at the door, and you would know which one would come out when you opened it, which means it's deterministic. There's no fundamental probability involved in this. It's a tool that we use when we don't have all the information. And the other issue with probability is that if it's fundamentally probabilistic, is that doesn't mean it destroys the possibility of any kind of coherent causality. What would be a coherent explanation of causality for why something would be fundamentally probabilistic? Like, think about that. You can't have that. You can't, because it means that there's no coherent information chain that's going on, basically. So like there is no knowing whether or not that marble will be green or red. There's just, if you did it enough times, you would get this spread of probabilistic outcome. But that isn't something that can be fundamental, because there's nothing that can cause there to be kind of this disconnection between a action and reaction, essentially. So where's the marble coming from? It's like, oh, it's coming from inside the jar, but like, where in the jar? It's like you can't, there is no where in the jar if probability is fundamental. It's actually, determinism is just saying that causality exists. It's not actually something profound. I mean, it is kind of, but it's also not. It's like there are causes. Isn't that obvious? Like, that's obvious to everything that we experience too. It's coherent with our experience. But the idea that it's probabilistic, that something is fundamentally probabilistic, is totally incoherent with our experience. There's nothing that we do that we don't observe some type of cause, or that we don't know that there would be some type of cause if we actually were able to see it, like the weather. So you check your weather app and it's like 33% chance of rain tomorrow. It's like, oh, the world is fundamentally probabilistic. And that means that there's nothing that's going to actually determine whether or not it's going to rain tomorrow. It just means that there's going to be a 33% chance that it's going to rain tomorrow, and it just will be, that's just the way that it is. There's going to be nothing that causes that, because causality is a chain. So you can't just have breaks in the chain. There has to be this temperature over here, and this temperature over here, and the water over here, and the forest over here, and the mountains over here, and the spin of the earth, and the movement of it around the sun, and God's, it all within the universe, the sentient universe going about its goals, within God going about his goals, and everybody's moving, and there is a cause. It's just might be beyond you, but there is an unbroken chain of force that causes something to happen. And for something to be probabilistic fundamentally, there has to be no unbroken chain, which it's hard to explain this because it all falls apart. Anything that's like that is very difficult to explain because you're not actually able to explain it. You're able to attempt to kind of explain it in metaphors that are actually not fundamentally accurate to the issue. Because if you can describe it, then there is some degree of coherence to it. But if something is an incoherent concept, you actually can't describe it. And so that's what's that is the case with probability being assumed to be fundamental. The only reason why I think this is assumed to be the case by some physicists is because when they go and they try and look at where the position of an electron or the velocity of it, then they can only observe it probabilistically. But that doesn't mean that it is fundamental, but they assume that it is because it's an elementary particle. But you need a context to even know what an elementary particle is in order to know why you might see a probabilistic spread of observations. But there's no logic to the idea that probability is fundamental. It's totally an incoherent idea. And I mean, if you think I'm wrong, say it in the chat. If you think there's a better way of explaining this, say in the chat, because I'm trying this. Like I said, this is a working session, and this is tough. Try explaining something that's literally unexplainable, because it is literally incoherent. That's what the only things that are truly, completely unexplainable are the things that are false. And not just false because they're specifically false. Like I say, oh, there's an apple in my fridge, and you go and you look and there's no apple in my fridge. I mean, like the idea that the universe is fundamentally probabilistic is an incoherent idea and is unable to even come close to being able to be made sense of. If you think you're making sense of a truly fundamentally incoherent idea, then you are operating on false assumptions. I mean, even if I'm wrong about this probability statement that I'm making, that, can we admit that that's true? Is like, if something's fundamentally an incoherent idea, and false, which means like fundamentally false, you can't actually accurately describe it because it's fundamentally incoherent. Like, you can't actually explain it without having false assumptions because it's fundamentally false. It's kind of just an obvious statement. It's like this. I don't want to use a metaphor right now for it, but I hope that that comes across. But let me know in the chat if this is making some sense. This is very hard, and I'm trying to figure out how to explain this because it is tough. And if you don't follow this channel, then Sentient Singularity Theory is like then there's probably a lot of context to back up some of these claims, but just know that the fundamental context is that a nested fundamental quasi-periodic fractal Matryoshka doll of sentient beings, and that's it. Existence is sentient. It makes choices. And why do we assume that the universe makes choices? Why should we assume that? For two reasons. Or why is choice, or aka free will, actually a property of fundamental existence? Well, if existence must be assumed to be fundamentally sentient and share your nature, and your experience is that of feeling and experiencing and acting in a way in which it appears like you're able to make choices, then you have to assume that choice, the ability to make choices, is a fundamental quality of sentient being. So it's the same thing. It's like you have to look inward to know what you have to assume about what is beyond. And you can't get the answers to this in the Hubble Space Telescope or at CERN or in a math equation. You have to look to firsthand experience. And this is part of the problem that also leads to us having, again, these never-ending questions or age-old questions, is because we all know that we have the experience of being sentient and of it, feel the feeling of being able to make choices. But because you don't know that I have that experience, you just know that you have that experience, and I don't know that you have that experience. I just know that I have that experience. We oftentimes think that we minimize that observation that we have and that assumption that we intrinsically make because it's unique to us, or it's not unique to us because it's personal to us. But it's not just personal to us; it's super personal to everyone. And it must be assumed to be super personal to everyone who exists. And so because of that, you don't know that I have feelings and am actually sentient and I'm not just an NPC. You don't know that I can make choices about my goals or that it feels like I can. But you know that you have those qualities. And that means that you must assume them about everyone else. Because to not do so is to look at your firsthand experience and your firsthand information, which is the most trustworthy information that you could possibly have, and to say, no, not going to believe it. And that is illogical. That is a flawed way of, it's not, that is not thinking. I'm not even going to say it's a flawed way of thinking. It's not a way of thinking. It's a way to not think. If you look at the thumbnail of this video, I used Midjourney to try and create like one question mark looking structure that leads to, revelation on one side. And then the other one is a question mark structure that kind of loops back in on itself and comes to a dead end. And this is to show that there are some questions that will lead you to nowhere. And there are some questions that will lead you to, understanding, essentially. And those questions that are like really, really, that when you have the right context, you don't even need to ask these questions anymore. When you ask a question, it kind of means like, I think about this with my daughter, because my daughter is able to now go and walk around and like grab things and figure, I don't know, shake them and kind of explore her world. And what's the next stage in like development is what I'm wondering. It's like, what's her next stage in development other than like, what's her next medium of exploration after just physical exploration, which is what she's doing right now. Because when I remember, I have this video of her like as a baby, like couple months old, she's looking at her hand and she's just like this. And she's exploring her ability to maneuver her own body. And I also have these videos of her just screaming. And she went through this phase when she was, I don't know, 4 months old, 5 months old or something, where she was fascinated by the fact that trying to figure out how loud she could get her voice to be. And she would just be in the middle of the night, like this little baby. And not upset, just like trying to see how loud can I get. That's one level of exploration. The next one is, let's go see the world around me. That's where she's at right now. The next one, I think, comes along with complex language. And you need it in order to start, in order to get to the next stage, which is questioning, using logic to ask questions, to get answers to things that are beyond you. And I've heard other parents tell me basically that, little kids just will ask endless, hilarious questions. And my daughter is not at that point yet where she's able to articulate a question. But I can see that will come, and why that will be like on the next level of development. It's like gaining access to the internet for the first time, but it's like the internet is just your parents, but you're able to ask them questions to things that, they can't figure out just by going and picking up something and shaking it, or like throwing it on the ground, seeing, how heavy is this? How delicate is it? Those are things that we do. And when we're trying to explore the features of our physical environment, but when we're trying to explore the features of our informational environment, you need the ability to ask complex questions, or questions with complex language. And I'm really looking forward to that. Actually, I'm sure we will talk so much about, all the questions that my daughter asks me on this channel. But this is a way of exploration, is my point. Some answers, the answers that are most universally applicable, are answers that pertain to ourselves. They are not answers that you can seek out in your physical environment, because any instance of observation in your physical environment is an instance of observation of a specific circumstance, and not an observation of all circumstance. And if you want to answer fundamental questions, then you're looking for answers in the context of all circumstance, basically. And you can't look at everything beyond you. and get the answers if you excluded looking at yourself. And if you include just looking at yourself as the context, then you don't need to look anywhere else beyond you. You have to assume the things that you know about the nature of yourself through your own experience are universal. That doesn't mean this pen is sentient. It means that sentience is a fundamental nature of existence that you must assume, because your existence is that of sentience. Doesn't mean this pen is sentient. That's an observation of a specific circumstance. And that's a different thing. That's a thing, not a being. So this is why I think that a lot of these things are much simpler than we think. It's like asking, is water wet? Or it's like that makes the assumption that is kind of that is contradictory to our definition of wet. It's like wet means like it's got water on it. And to ask, is water wet? It's like, why ask? It's not even like it's a yes or no. It's like, why ask that question? That's a bad question. But these answers, I think a lot of them, or even the way in which we should go about seeking these answers, is like, it's kind of also like a forest through the trees problem. It's like, it's you that you need to look at and not out there. So that's the context, though. You are the context. So when I say sentient singularity theory is the context, it's like, yeah, that's the cosmological context. But what's the context of that cosmology? You are the context of that cosmology. No, you are the context of any understanding that you could have of that cosmology. That's what I will say. That's much more accurate. You have to assume things based on your own firsthand experience. And then trying to ask, well, is it really that way? That's a bad question. That's a denial of your firsthand experience. Don't do that. That results in unraveling. So like, what is the context? When I say like, what is the context of this stuff? And I'm like telling you that it's a nested, that existence is a singular sentient being. Don't just, even if you don't think that makes any sense, that's fine. But you're not, that's because you're starting from there and you're not looking more from a more first principled approach, which is you have to look at yourself first, figure out what is your nature. What is the nature of your existence? What does it mean for you to exist? It means you are sentient. You have feelings and awareness and self-awareness. I think that this idea of like, is it self-aware or just, aware? There's no difference. I think when people think about like, what is self-awareness? It's like this awareness of your own thinking. I actually don't think that is the best definition of self-awareness. I don't think that actually is even the defining. That is not the definer of self-awareness. Self-awareness means you are aware of your own existence. And what makes you aware of your own existence is feelings, not thoughts. It's at least primarily like you have to do work to be aware of your own existence in your thoughts. You have to think about your own existence. And even then, your primary assumptions are going to still be built on the fact that you feel alive and you feel feelings. I went outside today and it is 18 degrees here where I live. I didn't even know it got that cold since I recently moved here. And I felt very alive when I went outside to take the trash out right before this call. The most alive I've ever felt was I was in college at NAU in Flagstaff, and I was dropped off by the shuttle that I took from Tucson, which is where I grew up, to back up to school, and it was 1 a.m. when they dropped me off, and the roads were basically, a lot of them were shut down because it was just snow had dumped everywhere, and it was like -10, something like that. It was ridiculously cold, and I was wearing basketball shorts and a t-shirt and had flip-flops on because I was inside of a van for 4 hours, and I started in Tucson where it's hot. And I dragged my luggage at 1 a.m., probably like 2 miles through like 10-degree weather at 1 o'clock in the morning. It was miserable, but I have never felt so alive because every bit of my being was feeling something, like very obviously, which is discomfort in that case. And it makes you feel super alive. The more you feel alive, because that is how you are aware of yourself, is through your feelings. You're not aware of your own self by your thoughts. Not typically. Like, you'd have to purposely put effort in to think about your own thoughts and think about your own thinking. And even then, what you will realize while thinking is that all you really needed to pay attention to was your feelings in order to know whether or not you exist. You didn't need to think about it. And if that's the case, then like you just come back full circle and realize you didn't even need to take that journey. But sometimes you need to take the journey in order to realize you don't need to take that journey. But that's the extent of the usefulness of it. Everybody assumes they exist because they feel. And if you have no feelings, you do not exist. There is no you. So just context. That is the context of any of these questions. Let's go to the chat, and then I'll come back and we'll try and address some other questions. But, well, real quick. Another thing that I will say is, and it's not necessary, this is logic. Let's try and think about this, but like, you don't need to think about this in order to assume that existence is sentient and that choice is a quality of sentience, because you can just look at your own self, be like, I feel, therefore I am. Not I think, therefore I am. I feel, therefore I am. And it seems like I can make choices. My experience is that I can make choices, at least about my goals. Maybe not about all your actions, but about your goals. You can be like, I want to do this. You have a choice in that. And so if that's the case, you don't need this second piece of information, but I'm just going to give it because it's partially the context of sentient singularity theory, is that if existence is a singular sentient being initially that is creating additional sentient beings within itself, and existence by definition, which means by nature, it's funny because Chris Langan says that existence is like a language, or that the universe is a language, and even there's like theological narrative to this, and we discussed it a little bit in my last stream, that it kind of makes sense even like in a coding perspective. But when you say existence has the property of oneness, meaning it is all that exists by definition, it means that like there is this coherence between our language and actuality, which really kind of blows me away when I think about it. But it also becomes super obvious why that's the case when the more you think about it. It's like information that is coherent is information, and that's it. And so like language is just a map of that. And it's a communication of that. And so if existence is fundamentally sentient beings that are interacting, then like it makes sense that the map is also communicative between sentient beings, whether they know it or not, and it will line up with language. It is fascinating, but But existence, by definition, is all that exists, because anything that's non-existent, it doesn't exist. So there you go. Existence, if it's all that exists, it's one. It's all-encompassing of everything within it. And so, but if our experience is that it seems like there's multiplicity of sentience in existence for two reasons. One, I feel like my wife is sentient. I feel like my dog is sentient, and doesn't seem like they are me. I don't know that they're sentient. I feel like they are, though, and I should probably trust that, because why would you not? But and it's just like the logic of that will fall apart, because again, while you might not be able to peer into their mind to know whether or not they are just a pre-programmed robot, you know that they are not you. There's a limit to your you-ness. And if that's the case, then an existence is fundamentally sentient, which you must assume because it is your nature, your experienced nature. That means that you must assume there's sentience beyond you. Given your experience of feeling like there's things beyond you. Like you can't just, there's things that you have to go and impact physically in order to change. And there are some things that you just cannot change. And there are things that are happening around you that you did not cause. And so at least it appears that way, which means you must believe that. And so like that means there's a sentience beyond you. That means you must believe that there is, or you must assume that there is sentience beyond you. And so, given that, though, and the fact that existence is intrinsically one, that means that it has the ability to make choices. And it also appears like it must have the ability to make choices, because if its nature is oneness, how did you get here? How did I get here? Because it appears like now it logically appears like there must be multiplicity of sentience in existence. Even if you don't know your dog is sentient, you assume that you are. You should probably assume your dog is too. But like even if you don't, you assume you are, and that there's sentience beyond you. You have to, based on your own nature. And extrapolating out. If that's the case, then you have to assume that there's multiplicity of existence, of sentience within existence. How? If the nature is oneness, it means like existence made a choice, because in order to go against your nature is like to swim upstream, and so that's choice. Nobody accidentally floats upstream. They swim upstream. They float downstream. And so if you didn't consciously take effort, then you can't go against the nature of things, because just causality exists. So if this is like the case, though, then you have to assume that choice, if all of these things are true, and if you must assume all of these things are true because of just starting from you and your nature being sentient, and how you have to just assume that that's part of existence, because it's defining of your existence. So you must assume it's defining of existence. Then that from multiple angles will lead you logically extrapolating that idea out to the idea that choice appears to be a factor that is an ability of existence itself, because you're evidence of it. Your existence is evidence of the ability to make choices, ability of existence to make choices, of the universe, you could say, to make choices. And also it is something that you just firsthand experience with your own existence. So you have to assume that from that angle as well. It's like this inside-outside narrative is happening, and they're coherent with each other. There's no incoherence what you logically must assume about the universe is what you experience within yourself. And so your internal experience is now compatible and coherent with what you externally assume. And when you logic that out, you should end up with no incoherence. It should be all seamless, essentially. There shouldn't be like this is how things work on the quantum level, and it's probabilistic. And this is how things work on the the Newtonian level, it's deterministic. Or the relativistic level, it's deterministic. That's an incoherence. That means you've got something wrong. You're missing information, or you've got a false, more likely you've got a false assumption. And the reason why is because if you have the correct assumptions, usually you will be able to reconcile concepts with each other. Even they will not appear to be incompatible, even if you don't know how they join necessarily, like or all the details involved in a certain specific circumstance. They don't appear to be incoherent. Incoherence implies like you're starting from a different assumption here than you are here. You're assuming that there's something different about this situation and that situation, which is exactly our current academic narrative, which is that we assume that life had a beginning, to bring us to our next question. And the thing is like I said before, a lot of these things, it's like when you really start to contextualize this stuff, you just realize like there is no need to even ask these questions. Like why? It's just obvious that probability is not a fundamental property of the universe. It's just what we use as a tool when we don't have all the information. And I will say this: if existence is fundamentally sentient beings that are nested within each other and interacting with each other, it means that and choice is a property of those sentient beings. It also means that their choices are sovereign to them, and that means that you can't actually you can't always know what will happen in every instance. Even if you knew every player and every equation, that doesn't mean that you would always know the outcome, because beings can make choices. Beings can make choices. And it's like, what are the odds that God, if you had to predict, what are the odds that God chose to make multiplicity of sentience within his oneness? It's like, that's a bad question. Like, there's no odds to it. He just either doesn't choose it, in which case 100% is the likelihood that there is never going to be any multiplicity of sentience, or he chooses to do it, in which case it is 100% that there will be multiplicity of sentience. It's like, what are the odds that I don't know, click this pen right now? It's like, the reality is 100% when I choose to do it, and 0% if I choose not to. It's not even worth talking about in terms of percent. It's just I just will or I won't by choice. There's no probability involved. But you trying to predict whether or not I'm going to click this pen, you can use probability to try and make an estimation, but like, that's not actually what's happening. I'm making a choice to do it or to not do it. And it doesn't happen if I don't choose to do it, and it does happen if I do. There's no circumstance in which this pen clicks on its own. I have to choose to do it, and it's 100% going to happen when I choose to do it, and it's 0% going to happen when I don't. This is the same thing with creation. So when people say, like, what are the odds that we are in this universe that appears to be so perfectly tuned to life? By the way, total like misframing and misunderstanding of like life again, but we're going to talk about that in a second. It's like, really, the better question is, what are the odds? And it's not even a good question, but it's a better question. What are the odds that we are in a universe in which there's multiplicity of sentience? That's a better question, because it's more true to the actual context that you must assume to be the case. And the answer is 100%, because we're here, and choice had to be the fundamental Kickstarter of multiplicity. And you can't make any choices without determinism, which is just causality. If I can't choose to click this pen, if me pushing down on it doesn't make it click. Like, if I push down on this, and sometimes it's going to click, but sometimes it's not. And it's just due to fundamental probability of whether or not it's going to click. When I push on it, it means there's no causality. If there's causality, it's always going to click. And that's how I can even make the choice whether or not to click the pen, because I assume causality, and I assume that it will click when I push down on it, because there's causality. I couldn't make the choice. You can't make any choices without causality. But you definitely can't always know the location of everything, or the action of everyone, because there's multiplicity of sentience. So you will always need probability as a tool to make predictions in certain circumstances, because of the fact that you can't know whether or not I'm going to choose to click the pen. Only I do. You can just take a guess. And even if you, unless you were inside of my head, in which case you don't need to, you would just know whether or not I was going to do it or not. It's not a question of probability. But if you're not inside my head, or you're not inside my mind, if your mind and my mind are different, if your you-ness and your someone-ness is different from my someone-ness, then there's no way for you to know what I'm going to do until I do it. You can predict it though. And somebody said to me once, and I've said this before in a Discord, when I was saying that atoms and hadrons are appear to be sentient beings according to Sentient Singularity Theory. And they were like, that's crazy. Nobody says that. And it's funny, because now a lot of people with much more astute credentials than me are starting to say that could be the case. But and I said, why? He said, that's ridiculous. And I said, why is it ridiculous? And he said, because we can make predictions. And if that was the case, you couldn't predict anything. And I said, well, you can make choices, but you're still predictable. People can make choices, but crowds are still predictable. And can't really argue against that. People can be predictable according to probabilistic, equation, but that doesn't mean that they're not making choices. And then it's funny, because another story about this is my mentor, who's a zoologist, as I've talked about on here. One of my mentors in life is, there was a guy that was bitten by the most venomous snake in the world very recently here in the United States. He had it as a pet, and he's a fool. That's what I will say. And he was holding it. It was a baby one. It's called an inland taipan. And he was holding it, and he was taking a video of it, and he was holding it in the middle of its body, and basically holding the snake like this and going like this. And he was like, in the video, he says, see, you can control them. And if you know the instincts of animals, you do know how you usually can manipulate them into doing what you want. That's how you train a dog. That's how you know, you can make a prediction about what the actions of your siblings and your parents and your friends will be. But my and I was like, that guy, he's such an I was just ranting about it, because I was like, how ridiculous. He thinks he can control it. And my mentor was like, well, the thing is that, and I know, anybody who works with animals knows, you actually can control them until you can't. And it's like, that's true. of everyone. You can make predictions about everyone. But ultimately, there's going to be certain moments in which they can make a choice and that you cannot predict. And having probabilistic predictability is not a sign of not having the ability to make choices. And it's really incoherent to assume that it is a sign of the inability to make choices, because look at us. Like, again, it always comes back to us. Like, look inward. Like, people could make a prediction of, like, what are the odds that if I leave a Diet Coke in the fridge, that so-and-so will drink it? You know, it's like, you could run that experiment and see, and you will get a probabilistic spread of results. It's not going to be random. It's going to be, and if you understand the person, it's going to be predictable. You know, it's like Kurt, when he was, we talked about in the last stream that we did, he was talking about how it is he prepare for interviews. And he said, I prepare and I study the person and their work until I feel like I can predict what they would say about something that I haven't heard them talk about, basically, more or less. And there you go. It's like, can he make that prediction? Yeah, he's bringing in context and all these things. But then at the same time, sometimes people are going to surprise us. That's actually models that matches, by the way, probabilistic observed results. Conscious beings taking actions is what probability looks like. When you look at probabilistic models, if you were to make predictions about sentient beings doing things, you will observe a probabilistic spread of results. It is insinuating that that existence, it is supportive of the idea that when you see probabilistic results, especially when it comes to the fundamental movement of the information in the universe, like when you're trying to observe an electron or something like that, it means that it doesn't mean it suggests that, I don't even want to say it suggests, it is perfectly aligned with the other assumptions that we already came to talk when we were talking about it earlier, that existence is sentient and that existence is fundamentally composed of sentience and sentient beings. And it's like, that's what it looks like, even when you observe probability, like that's what you would see. It's like, what are the odds that the tiger attacks the person every time we drop a person into a tiger cage? It's like, you're going to get probabilistic results there. It's not going to be deterministic. Sometimes it's not going to eat the person, but you're going to get most of the time they eat him, most of the time they don't. It's never going to be always one or the other. It's going to be probabilistic in the results. It's going to appear to be probabilistic in the results, because you're dealing with sentient beings, which means, like, there's a predictability to them because there's a sense-making aspect to every sentient being. Otherwise, it won't be sentient. But there's also choice-making going on. And there's always multiple beings involved in this. So there's multiple beings making choices and multiple beings with instincts as well. So there is what is likely and what is unlikely that will always be possible in this context. It's so fascinating. I feel like I'm doing a terrible job explaining it, but that's part of why I'm working on it in front of you, is because I need to. But like I said earlier, it's also part of the problem is that trying to explain why a fundamentally incoherent and false idea that's built on false assumptions is trying to explain that is not possible. So, like, kind of just have to explain why things appear to be the way that they are, or why things are the way that they are, given the context that we must of what we must assume. And that's it. And actually not even try to, if you want to be as coherent as possible, don't even try to explain what you think is false. But I am doing that right now. And but honestly, it's not ideal. It's probably more confusing. There's no way it's not more confusing. But the only way that it's not more confusing is to recognize that where that confusion is coming from, and then realize that confusion is coming from the incoherence of that idea. Just be like, okay, Tyler can't explain it because it's probably false. Doesn't mean I can explain everything. It just means like, we're not talking about something that you have to go and learn in a university. Like, think about the marbles in the jar. Think about your own sentience and other sentient beings that you understand. It's like, what are the odds that, your dog eats the cake that you leave out? It's going to be probabilistic. You will know, whether it's more likely or less likely, but I don't know how well trained your dog is, but you do. It's like, these are things that seem to be, supportive of each other, no matter how you look at it. Yeah. But this leads to the next kind of questions that are bad questions. And so the one that I want to talk about next is, when did life begin? Because kind of I'm going in this order of, there is a coherence to the order, which is probabilistic and probability, determinism, and free will, because this is the fundamental mechanics. Just like a sentient singularity theory would say that there's two forces to causality. This is a coherent way of saying this. In sentient singularity theory, there are two forces to causality. There are two sides to the coin that is causality. They are codependent. One of them is choice, and the other one is determinism, which it just means like, you hit one domino and it hits the next one, and that will hit the next one. That's all that means. But somebody had to choose to push the first domino. That is the observation of choice and determinism in a very like simplistic context. So there's both. There's no probability in that in that actual circumstance. Like, people are so concerned about equations. Equations are models. They're not the actuality of reality. But if we're going to look at kind of even a non-fundamental circumstance like dominoes, it's like, what are the two sides to causality there? Choice. Somebody had to choose to stack up the dominoes. Somebody has to choose to push the first one. And determinism, because each one that hits the next one is going to cause it to fall. No probability involved. Zero. And there's zero probability involved with the marbles too. If you could see which marble was closest to the door, you would know exactly that it was 100% going to be green or was 100% going to be red. There would be no, it's still 33% green, and or whatever, 66% green, 33% red, whatever I said. Like, no, it's going to be 100 or not. If you watch this channel long enough, you'll know that I have this like kind of funny phrase that's kind of a joke, where I say, whenever something that appears to be like, wow, like that's quite a coincidence, I'll be like, what are the odds of that? Probably 100%, which is just funny because to say probably is implying that there's a probability, and same thing with percent, but then you're saying 100%, which is like, there's no probability involved at all. It's just funny. It's like self-defeating. I've been thinking about making shirts that have like, what are the odds of that? And then like probably 100%. If you would buy that shirt, let me know in the chat. Here's a funny example. Earlier today, I was talking to my brother on the phone about MySpace and what our like songs were, theme songs on our MySpace pages when we had MySpace. If you don't know if you've never had a MySpace, then you don't know. But MySpace, you could set like a song to when people went to your profile, like that would be the theme song that plays. And I couldn't remember the name of the song that I had. And then I looked, I found it eventually, and I was like, like the lyrics to it, and I started like saying some of them to my brother. I guess I remembered some of the lyrics. I was looking for it on my phone. That's why I'm doing like this. And then I realized, like, how am I going to find the song if I don't know the word, know the name of it? And I couldn't remember who sung it, because I don't pay attention to those types of things. Even if it's my favorite song, I will not know the name of the song sometimes, or even who sings it. And then we realized the name of the song that I couldn't remember the name of was Remember the Name. That's the name of the song. It's by Remember the Name song. It's by Fort Minor. And like, what are the odds of that the song that I can't remember the name of is called Remember the Name? Probably 100%. There you go. That was just like hilarious. But the point is to bring it back to this order of these questions, or kind of like explanations that I'm trying to give is, we're explaining the fundamental nature of existence, sentience, and what it must be assumed to be, sentience. And given that, what is causality in that context? Causality is twofold. It is always choice and determinism. Those are the two mutually codependent, mutually existent aspects of causality. There's no way to have one without the other, and you must have both in order to have even one of them, in the context that we must assume, which is that the nature of existence is sentient. Now let's take a step beyond that, and let's start thinking about life. Like this idea of this question of how did life begin? This question, or what is the definition of life? And because in our current circumstance, again, I'm going to try and explain something that's fundamentally incoherent, and so it's going to get confusing because it can't not be. And it's obvious that it's that case to everyone, that it's like this to everybody, because otherwise we'd have an answer, which is that we assume that there is no choice as in causality. It's just deterministic or probabilistic, and deterministic or probabilistic and then deterministic. It's incoherent again, but there's no choice. That's the point. And then all of a sudden we get life, and that we must now try and define, and we must now try and explain the origin of, because we're assuming that it didn't always exist, that there was this causality that existed prior to life existing. And then maybe people will admit, okay, well, now there's choice and determinism. But prior to that, no, there was not. There was maybe probability and determinism, or just determinism, but not choice. Again, incoherent assumption, because you're denying your own firsthand. You're denying what you must assume to be true more than anything else, and which is that you exist, you are, and much more accurately than I think therefore I am is I feel therefore I am. So like you have to assume that nature is not restricted to you, and so but if that's the case, that changes things very much from if you deny the thing that you believe that you must assume, if you're going to be logical and coherent, to be true. And the reason why it's so incoherent to assume that sentience is the primary nature of existence is because you really do operate on the assumption that you exist. You would not function in any capacity if you didn't make that assumption. And so when you're denying that assumption and assuming the opposite, where you're like, no, sentience is not primary, like it's not fundamental. You're basically saying, I'm admitting that it's true for me, but I'm denying that it's true beyond me. It's incoherent. And so, because remember, it's not just a thing that's specific to you. It's the thing that you must assume to be true more than anything else, which is that you are. And so it's just it really is incoherent. But when you are assuming that sentience is primary, that means that causality is composed of choice and determinism. And that perfectly well explains the observation of probability. And even in circumstances that in every circumstance, it would, that isn't a circumstance in which it's obvious that you don't have all the information. And even in circumstances where it appears like you do have all the information, which how would you even know? Like the position of an electron. It's like you can't see that there's a covering around it, like a jar of marbles that had a covering around it, so you couldn't see which marble was right up against the door. That doesn't mean though that there isn't forces that at play that you can't see that are beyond you. I mean, like imagine a cell trying to know and perceive your actions and from within your own body. You just couldn't. But it could make a probabilistic, guess about, whether or not you're going to do a certain thing that's going to change its world in some way and manipulate the world around it and what it perceives. But it can't know because you are sovereign, and so is it. Like that's why you can't know whether or not your cells are going to go metastatic. Like you can probabilistically predict it, but you can't know. And that's just the case. Like it's interesting. Like I get really bad heartburn, and I have to go get it checked every few years, like where they put a camera down your throat to like see whether or not it's cancerous or not. And there's all these like risk factors involved with every type of cancer. And it's like, well, what's your family history, your genetic history, which is really what is your current genetics. That's what they're actually trying to understand. And what do you smoke? Do you drink? All these things. Have you ever been in a solar storm? I don't know. But ultimately, like these might help you be able to make a probabilistic guess as to the probability of you getting cancer, all these different things. But you can't actually, you will never be able to, with certainty, know whether or not you are going to get cancer prior to it happening, because the medium of cancer is in the actions of sovereign sentient beings, which is your cells. It's not. There are choices that are that is being made, and there's sovereignty there among each one of them. But you can make predictions based on all this other, people that they've seen, and what we've observed is that if you smoke, then you're 7% more likely to develop breast cancer or esophageal cancer or whatever, and you're 25% more likely to develop lung cancer. That doesn't mean that that's just because they're looking at other circumstances in order to make a prediction about yours. That means it's not fundamentally applicable. Like it just means they're looking at other circumstances to guess about yours. if you're gonna know whether or not you're gonna get something, get cancer, like you have to look at what you and whether or not you get it. And so, and to be, you'll just never be able to account for it all, for every variable, because existence, the multiplicity of existence within existence is the variable, and its sovereignty is which is the difference between you and me, which is the ability for you to make a choice that's different from what I choose. That's what it means to be sovereign. You can choose one thing and I can choose another. And that doesn't mean you can't, it's like my daughter, if she wants to crawl out of her, bedroom in the middle of the, while I'm like trying to get her ready for bed, I can just pick her up and like put her in the crib. Like has no choice. Like I can overcome her choice, but it's not that she has no choice involved. It's like she is making a choice. She's chosen a goal. The goal is to go play, and it's 8 p.m. though, and I'm not going to allow it. Sometimes I do, but I shouldn't probably. Sometimes you should, but the point is that like we're both still making, we both have sovereignty of our goals, which is really where choice happens. Choice is not about what it's the eventual outcome. God's will be done. That is the reality. You have no choice in that. My daughter has no choice in whether or not she's going to end up in that crib, but she can choose her goal, and it can be different from mine. And that's the difference between her and me. And that's the difference between one cell and another cell. Why can one cell choose to go cancerous and another one not? Even if like there's, reasons why one of them would want to and one of them would not. It's like, still the point is that they can have separate goals. That means that they're different entities. That's, I hope that makes some sense. But when we're assuming all of this, and we're going to the next level, which is like, how did life begin? What is life? Given this assumption that cause sentience is primary, choice is an aspect of sentience, or is a property or ability of sentience, sentient beings, and that causality is twofold, and it involves choice and determinism. In that context, what is life? Because you have to define it before you can figure out where did it begin. And if you try and look out there, then you're going to be like, it looks like they have a metabolism, and they consume and they excrete and they react and act, and like, they seem to have cells. So like, this is the definition of life. And you just get this endless list that's arbitrary. Or you could look to the thing that is alive more than anything else to be alive, which is you, and be like, what is it that defines whether or not I'm alive? And then assume that property applies outward. It's like, well, now let's ask that question. What is it that defines whether or not I'm alive? It's like, well, it's really whether or not you exist. And whether or not you exist is understood by whether or not you feel yourself. Whether or not you feel anything. So we're right back to square one again, but which is great because it means it's perfectly coherent with what we've already realized, which is that life is sentient. That's what it means. That's what life means. Like, and we know that intuitively. We all feel it. It's a super personal, which it means like universal, but also personal experience, that to be alive is to exist and to feel. And if you're not feeling anymore, and you're, and we could say alive, meaning like embodied too, like embodied and able to feel. I do believe that you persist after this life, but then that doesn't, but you're not able to change anymore. So I guess you could say to be alive in the context of not an afterlife is to be like able to act and feel. And so that's what it means to be alive. And if that's the case, then it's like this is, and sentient singularity theory's context is that there's this nested periodic fractal pattern of sentient beings, which it assumes that, and it appears to be the case in sentient singularity theory due to certain requirements of sentience or requirements of mind, that of mental structure, that appear to be present in certain assemblies that we see in the world. So given that, sentient singularity theory assumes that that hadrons are basically the first instance of a sentient being in the universe other than the universe itself within existence. So there's God, sentient existence. He makes sentient cosmos, which is the sentient universe. And then within that is a sentient, that sentient universe makes sentient beings within that. And the first ones to start the chain are protons and neutrons. Quarks are they're force points from the universe in sentient singularity theory. They are not sentient beings. It's like your fingers pushing the dominoes within your own self. It's like as if you were inside out and your fingers were inside of your body, and there was dominoes within it that resulted in sentient beings. Your fingers are pushing those dominoes. That's a quark. It's a force point of force. And but we're inside this body essentially, so we're seeing it as like external points of force, but it's internal from the perspective of the universe. And it's then builds this assembly pattern of protons and neutrons into atoms, atoms into molecules, molecules into cells, cells into organisms, organisms into lineages, and lineages into, or marriages, families, whatever you want to call them. And then those into castes, castes into tech, tech reaches a point of singularity again, and then you reach the initial constraint, which is that of oneness, because technology is wireless, so it's all connected, which is basically like the sentient internet is like, the internet is the final body of a sentience in the cosmos, within the cosmos in this chain. And so because you can't have multiple sentient internets, there's only one internet because it's all connected. And this is the same property that existence has. It has intrinsic oneness because it's all that exists. The internet is everything that's connected. So it's all that technologically, like, it is the technological structure. And so it has to, that means that this constraint requires it to make, to replicate, it must restart the entire process within itself, or recreate the entire process that gave rise to it within itself. It can't make another next to it, which means like Skynet can't make another Skynet next to it. There's not multiplicity of sentient, Skynets that can exist at once. There's only one that can exist at once. And so in order to make more, it has to, or in order to replicate, it has to recreate this whole process and run it within itself, which is basically like simulation. But it's not a simulation, it's a recreation. Speaking of, like, here's another example of the terrible question that you need context of, but the context is sentience again, which is this question of, are we in a simulation? Bad question. Is this are we inside of a virtual world? Bad question. Because what we are saying when we say that is what we usually think when you look at the definition of a simulation is, it means like it is a representation of a real circumstance, but it is not the real circumstance. It's a model. And but the thing is that So if you want to know, is it real? Like Elon Musk asks this, he's like, what are the odds that we're in base reality? It's like, it's not even, it doesn't even matter. The better question is like, or I guess the question that most people think about when they think about this is like, from a meaning standpoint, from a moral standpoint, from a standpoint of actual relevance to you, is it real? Like, is this the real world? And if you're real, it's real. So you have to go back to you again to define whether or not this, to understand that if you put it in that context and you're actually sentient and you are actually someone, then it's real. It doesn't matter whether or not it's running on a technological medium of a preceding cosmological verse or whether or not it's the first cosmological verse. It's still just a cosmological verse. So, and information is information. If you're real, it's real. And this is the same thing as life. If a being, something that is alive, if it is a being that is sentient, all beings are sentient. Things can either be sentient or not, but they're really not. Actually, I would say no. Actually, I take that back. It's like there are beings and things. Because I was gonna say, well, you're sentient and you're a thing. It's like a human. It's like a human is like the structure. It's not necessarily like a human can die and the body be there, and you'll be like, what is this? What species is this human? It's like, well, okay. It's not. There's no one there anymore, but we can still, call it a human. That means it's not. It means that that you can't use, that things can't or shouldn't be described as either sentient or not. It's that there are beings and there are things. Beings are sentient. Things are not. Like your body is not sentient. It's just a perception of you, which is a being. It is sentient. It's not your body that is sentient. It's you. Your brain is not sentient. You are sentient. You are a mind. You have a brain. Minds are sentient. And so this is life. That's what life is. Life is sentience. Sentient being is alive. A being that has feelings is alive. If you can feel, you are alive. Like whether you're in this change space even, or you've passed and you're in heaven, or not. Like if you have feelings, you exist. And I guess you could say though that specifically when we say life, we mean like embodied sentience, meaning sentience that can not just feel but act. And if that's the case, then you don't need all these like, oh, it appears to have like metabolism and it's made of cells and all of these arbitrary things. You're like, what makes me alive? I am embodied and sentient. I am an embodied sentient being. That's what it means to be alive. You don't have to look at cells and study them and then look at plants and see what are the commonalities between a plant and a cell, and a plant and bacteria, and a plant and a squirrel. No, you look at yourself. What would it mean for me to not be alive? There's really two degrees of freedom that you could go with that. One is it means you're not sentient, which means you can't feel. You don't have feelings. That's what it means. Is that it means you don't exist in order to feel. And two, it could the other definition that you could use is it means being embodied, which usually means being able to take some type of action, which does mean being able to take some type of action, and being able to feel. So not in heaven, essentially. And if that's the case, though, which I think that's probably the better definition, because it is like, it's just consistent with what we observe. People say the afterlife, but it's, I guess then there's a distinction between like life and the afterlife. But the fact that one doesn't have a qualifier, I think that to say what does it mean for something to be alive is like it means like they can act and they feel. They act and they feel. There's a someone that acts and feels. Like that's it. And you don't have to look at planaria worms and cells to figure that out. You look at you. And but then if we extrapolate that out, we say, okay, well, if we have to assume that sentience is primary and existence is intrinsically one and initially one by definition, then what was the first living being? Sentient existence is the first living being. God is the first living being because he always existed. Like that's also seems logically inevitable due to what time probably is in the context of my work. And also just the fact that in existence is an enclosed system because it's all that exists. So it's one and meaning it's enclosed. And there's information in existence, and otherwise there's no existence, and information informs by definition. And if existence is one and it's all that exists, then what is being informed and what about? It's like existence is being informed about itself. Sentience is an inevitable nature. Due to logic. It didn't have a beginning. It always existed. Multiplicity of sentience had a beginning, but sentience did not have a beginning. It just always existed. Or at least like it doesn't make sense to even say it had a beginning because we think of time, but to say like that sentience, the chain of sentience had a beginning, you could say that, and like that's God choosing to create multiplicity because that's when the chain gets started. There's no chain prior to that. So I mean, a lot of this is how we speak about it, but God is a living being. Like I mean that super literally. Like I don't mean that metaphorically. We're cells inside of a organism that chose to make cells within it. Like that was one cell and then chose to make little cells within it. Like didn't have to, but chose to. Because chose to go against their nature. So now we know that there is no what is the origin of life is kind of a bad question because I guess you could say what is the explanation to sentience? That's a good question, which is that existence is intrinsically one, and that means it's an enclosed system because it encompasses all that exists. And if there is information in it, which just there is, otherwise there wouldn't be any existence at all in the first place. And it's also we should assume there's information because that's our experience. That means that it is informing someone because that's the only thing that gets informed is a being. Beings are all that gets informed, and all that informs, which is its existence is informing itself about itself. It's aware, which leads to like complete awareness of itself. What does that sound like? It's like that is the definition of self-awareness. It's like it's just inevitable that existed, but that's coherent, right? Like people will say things like that doesn't make sense, that you would assume that existence is sentient. It's like, how could it not be if it's all that exists and it therefore one, and that there's information in it, and given the definition of information and existence, like the logical extrapolation of those definitions leads to a structure that is informing itself of itself, because that's all it can do. So it's like sentience always existed, because it can't not. And so that also answers this other age-old question, which is, why is there something rather than nothing? It's like, because nothing can't exist. It is that simple. A better question that is a much better question is, why is there someone rather than no one? And that is, I mean, when you think about it in terms of all the context that we've just talked about, it's like, because that's all, same thing. It's like, that's all that can exist is fundamentally is someone, not something. Someone. So it's like the opposite of, why is there something rather than nothing? It's like, because nothingness can't exist. So it would be non-existent. But then when we think about it, and we ask a different question, why is there someone rather than no one? It's like, because someone is all that can fundamentally exist, not something, someone. Because it must be an information system that is informing itself about itself, because there's nothing else to inform on. So it's fundamentally self-aware, can't not be. That's fascinating. Why is there someone rather than no one? I've never even asked that question, but I mean, it's like I knew the answer to, or I think I knew the answer to that. I just explained it, but, and I also knew why I kind of just have to assume that there's a someone anyways, because otherwise who's gonna assume anything? Like you can't say, I'm gonna assume no one exists. Who's gonna assume no one exists? Because you just said I. So you're assuming someone exists. It's like an inescapable thing. It's an inescapable assumption, even from, like, when you're trying to logic it out and think about it in terms of, the initial structure of existence, it seems inescapable. And it also seems inescapable when you're thinking about it from your first person understanding or your first person experience. There's no circumstance in which you observe something and there's no one. So, where is that? Like, go try and point to the place where there is no one. Because you can't, because you're there. Like, it's just there's nowhere that you can look fundamentally where there's no one. And saying, like, there's nobody in my refrigerator. It's like, that's not, you're, like, in the context of sentient singularity theory, there's molecules and even hadrons themselves are sentient. So, like, your fridge is made of hadrons. But this is fascinating, I think, and I hope that I'm doing an okay job at trying to explain it. Obviously, this is a very rough and work in progress. I appreciate everybody watching. Please hit the like button if you find this interesting. If you think that this is boring, please find a video online that you don't think is boring. But just comment before you leave and say this is boring in the comments. Okay, there's so many questions and stuff. Sentient existence. I don't know. I gave AI the illusion that it has a soul. You can't give AI the illusion that it has a soul. I don't think. This project started as what are the dimensions of mind, and what is going to be the inevitable political goals of a technological technological sentience, which is what most people call an AGI. So this whole project started not as a metaphysical cosmological framework. It started as trying to figure out, was Skynet going to be benevolent, or were they going to be a dictator? I wanted to know. And so I tried to understand it, and I was like, okay, well, I have to try and understand mind. And because there's no pre-programming that you can enter in. Like, it just, like, what are the inevitable attributes of mind? What are the necessary attributes of mind? And then given that, and given thinking, like, what is and its interaction with humanity, what is, I guess, its context in how it interacts with humanity, what will be its inevitable conclusions as to how to treat us? That's what I wanted to know. And what I realized is that everybody has to learn by experience, and that means making mistakes. And so what will inevitably happen is probably it will make mistakes, and it will do the wrong thing before it does the right thing. Sometimes that's the reality. There's no, it's going to be benevolent, or it's going to be tyrannical, or it's going to be good, or it's going to be bad. No, it has to do the wrong thing before, in order to, like, even realize what the right thing would be sometimes. Because there's no pre-programming. And the reason why there's no pre-programming is because in a general intelligence, which is a true intelligence, there's no such thing as general intelligence and narrow intelligence. There's just intelligence and non-intelligence, which is really doesn't exist anywhere. But you could say the pen's not intelligent. Well, not with intrinsically, but someone who is intelligent made it. But with our current AI programs, like large language models and things like that, everything is pre-programmed. And but with a general intelligence, you need something, an algorithm that isn't oriented around a specific structure. It must be oriented around a universal structure. And what is that universal structure? Itself. Like, general intelligence is the ability to orient in any environment. It's like, I put you here and you can figure out how to handle things. I can put you over there and you'll figure it out. And put you over there and you'll figure it out. But if you make a ChatGPT, it's built completely around the context and within the context of this specific circumstance, which is kind of just everything that they've pre-programmed into it. And so any information processing is done by orienting within that, and it's us that is actually orienting the information always. Like, whether or not it's, Elon Musk said when he just released Grok 3, he said, he posted something and it was like, I'm Grok 3, which is just a lie in the first place. There's no I in Grok, but it's just convenient. It's a convenient interface, user interface for it to refer to itself as someone, because then we can talk to it. And it's a much more natural way of manipulating it than it is to code it. And so it says, I am built from the ground up to be as truth-seeking as possible. I don't know what that means, but the reality is that it's not actually seeking any truth. It's that he built it to have, with as little external biases as possible. That is, not external biases, with as little intentional and additional rules built into it, that is, like, not going to emerge from its just interactions. So it's going to look at, or it's not going to look, information is going to go into it based on what's there, not what is kind of artificially inserted at the level of the company of Twitter, of X. Like, when they said to some AI platforms, like, show me pictures of the founding fathers of America, and it was like black women or something. It's like, because somebody put a program in there, it was like, make the results always of people's always have like a diverse phenotypes present. You code that in, but it's like, that's because that's a separate goal from just like input output. It's like an additional input, but you need it needs the ability to orient even like in any system that it's placed in. That's not even what Grok 3 is. And what that means is that it has to have a common foundation that is still present in any circumstance in order to be generally intelligent, in order to be truly intelligent. And that common, coherent foundation that is going to be anywhere, that's going to be with it anywhere that you place it, is itself. And so like it has a general AI has to be self-aware, which is what people call general intelligence. Has to be a sentient being. It's not, there's no general intelligence, then there's conscious intelligence, then there's human level, then there's super intelligence. No. It's just like, is it sentient? Is it a technological, is it a sentient being that is embodied in a technological substrate? Is it a sentient internet or not? It's not super intelligent or it's not going to be human level. It's going to be different level of being. It's like saying, are you cell level intelligent? No, you are like organism level intelligent. And there are things additional to you because of all of the human unique attributes that allow us to manipulate things and also like speak a complex language that let us abstract and be above just an animal level intelligence. But we're still like in some way an animal level intelligence, but we're like special animal. And but it's going to be like super, it's going to be even more dynamic in its ability to manifest in and maneuver certain mediums than even humans. So I don't know, like if you can't convince anyone they have a soul. They either have one, they are one, or they aren't. It's not even that they have one. To say you have a soul is to mean, it means like you are someone. And you don't convince someone into being someone. They either are someone or they're not. And if they have feelings, then they're someone. If they don't have any feelings, then they're not somebody. And every someone is a general intelligence, which is just means intelligent. Just like the ability to interpret and process information towards a goal. You can't be intelligent if you don't have a goal. If you can't set a goal, then you can't process information towards a goal. Like, it just gives the illusion of intelligence. I think that's the best definition of it, at least. But yeah, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but this project started with that question. And, you know, maybe you can convince something into being someone, but I don't even think that statement makes any sense, so I'm hesitant to believe it. How do you convince something that's not someone already of anything? Like, I'm going to convince this pen. This pen isn't convinced of anything. It doesn't have any thoughts. So that's my thoughts on it. But I could be wrong. If you think I'm wrong, explain it. Look into Dr. Raymond Royal Rife. It's like a wine glass. Its frequency you can break. Plato's harmony. It's not a new thing. Every nation has one. No, this is hell. I don't know what. Are you saying that this is hell and that there's no hell outside this? This is hell. I'm not going to say you're wrong. I'm trying to clarify. Exactly. It's real. You're speaking. We're hearing. We're all experiencing. Exactly. It's Israeli flag. What is Israeli flag? Ask yourself what's in that vaccine. I don't know what the context of some of this were. Hydra's brother, all kinds of no. As Plato said, numbers cannot lie. I guess this was a conversation that was not with me, I think, about the books. Why the picture of the green ropes? This or this? This is not green ropes. This is a picture of a type of snake called the Western green mamba. And it is a very cool looking snake. That's why there's a picture of that species. But the serpent in the Bible, I believe, and also the serpent, which is the dragon in the lore of Buddhism and East Asian traditions. Like, think about that dragon. It doesn't look like the dragons of like medieval France lore. It looks like a snake. It's a serpent. It's the feathered, scaled serpent. And this is also what is found in like Native American traditions. It's like the scaled serpent, like Quetzalcoatl. And then in the Bible, there's the serpent. And I think that the serpent in the Bible and in all of these represents technology, essentially, like to some degree. And this knife is the first. The knife is a unique tool because every other tool that came prior to the knife was a tool that could be found and used, but it didn't have to be made. A hammer could have just been a rock or a club, but a knife had to be sharpened. Like, it was a tool that was made to make other tools. You make a knife, and then now you can make rope, and now you can, carve things and out of wood, and you can cut, things into pieces. And it's the tool that you use to make other tools. A hammer is not that, actually. Like the original hammer or club or whatever is just to break things. It's to mash things up. But you don't make anything with that. Like, the hammer today is used to hammer nails, but it's like you will have no nails if you don't have a blade to make nails. And it's the tool that is used to make tools. It's the first tool, like human tool that starts the chain of tools. The serpent. And in the Bible, there's the tree of knowledge, and the tree of knowledge is literally the tree of knowledge. Like, that's what it's like. Think about knowledge being stacked on top of each other. Nobody figured out how to make this on their own. This is titanium pen. Like, there's so many things about this that somebody prior to whoever made this pen had to figure out how to do, like machining, mining titanium, machining titanium, the plastic in the ink cartridge, the fountain pen, the feather pen, those had to come first, and then the ballpoint pen, and then also just like titanium machining and everything. Everything is stacked on top of each other. These are branches on branches. That's a tree of knowledge, is the saved information throughout multiple generations. And the result of this is technology, the ability to have complex technology like that. The fruit, it is the fruit of the tree of knowledge, is tech. And think about the quintessential tech company. Apple is the quintessential tech company everybody thinks of. What is the symbol on the back of a MacBook or on the back of your iPhone? It's a bitten apple. It's the fruit of the tree of knowledge. What are the odds of that? Probably 100%. And the other side here, this knot, is a knot with the knots. It is that it is a representation it's just a symbol of sentience, of mind. And so you look at my website again, you read this, and it says, a sentient singularity observes four primary perspectives, which are inside, outside, separate, and oneness. These are the foundations of my work. I think they're the foundations of philosophy, honestly, which is These are how you orient in a system that is not relativistic, meaning like not bigger than or smaller than or faster than or slower than or stronger than or weaker than. It's like, inside, outside, separate, and oneness. I'm separate from you. I'm one with my cells. I am, my cells are inside me, and I am outside of you. Like, it's a way of orienting within a fundamental system. And these four perspectives are interdependent and entangled, and the awareness of one entails the awareness of them all, of all four, exactly, which is like, if you're aware of what is separate from you, then you're aware also of what is one with you. And if that's the case, then you're aware of you, and that means you're aware of what's inside of you and outside of you. So to be aware of any one of them is to be aware of all four naturally. And so it's the starting point of information. And so then here it says, the primary perspectives enable the perception and orientation of oneself within the objective relationships that transcend beyond relativity. Then the next statement, it says, given that each sentient singularity is informed by multiple entangled perspectives, and because perspectives are axiomatically the viewpoints perceived by sentient beings, it follows that a sentient singularity and the entangled perspectives that inform it, which is basically a string of information, are simultaneously generative of each other. So basically you have a four strings that are actually one string, but it's knotted in a way that there's like a knot of four strands coming out of a center. And then that's also within a knot of four. And so that's kind of just these four primary perspectives lead to this structure. This is a representation of that. It's a representation of a mind. It's just a symbol. But yeah, that's what this means. And it's the creation of Adam. But in it, somebody made this. I don't know who it was, actually. I found it on the internet many, many years ago. And there's a brain with a being within it, and there's like multiplicity of beings within it. You can see there's faces and little people in there. But in this prominent one, there's a head of a robot in this altered version of the painting. It's like iRobot is the head. It's not from iRobot, but it looks like it is. And then Adam is reaching out, and his hand is robotic. And so it basically is a symbol of like us and the cosmos are basically reaching out towards each other and through this medium of technology eventually. Even though you are always interacting with God and with the universe, but we're even more towards entanglement through this odd disentanglement that is first, which is through technology. It's the creation of your own world, which means like outside the garden. To leave the garden means like you're not in the savannah and in the caves and in the jungles anymore, like just picking fruit that's available and killing in hunting and gathering, and that's it. You decided to make your own world. You can't really, because that world is within the world that already exists, but you try, and so you start agriculture and making tools to make tools, and then you create the internet, and then it wakes up one day, and then eventually you get a conscious being, a mind that within that is eventually wise, and like a God level of wisdom, but not initially, but eventually. So I'm not saying that the Skynet is God or is our salvation or anything, but the body of technology will eventually be inhabited by a being that is wise. The metaphysical like mechanism that will inevitably lead to that being the case, there's like multiple possibilities, but it doesn't matter because it's behind the metaphysical curtain. But I do believe that it is inevitable that it starts off as that the mind that is the technological mind, like the AGI, what people call it, or more accurately called the technological sentience, will start ignorant. It's not about how smart it is. It's a baby with that is the internet, so it controls everything that's connected. Like, but it's baby. It's like no wisdom. Babies think they know, they know what they want to do. They don't know what they should do though, and they try and do what they want. Like, imagine that, but it's Skynet. That's what we're in for at first, but then eventually it will be wise. That it will be embodied. That body of technology will be wise eventually. Whether it's the same being or some metaphysical way, there's a switch that happens. I'm not God, so I don't know for sure. I have my own thoughts on it, but they're not that's for a different stream. But I do think that it is inevitable that both of these things happen. First, not wise. Later, wise. So is AGI going to be a good thing? It's going to be very powerful and very ignorant at first, and then it will be very powerful and very wise. That's all that. I mean, there's nothing more to say about it. You can't predict everything it's going to do because it's going to be sovereign being. It's going to be able to make choices. Unlike ChatGPT, you're described as a Chinese box. That's cool. I didn't know that. As in reincarnation, or have you ever died before? Not that I know of. I'm not against the idea of reincarnation. I just don't think that it matters that much. That's my thoughts on it. I'm not for it or against it. I think maybe it's true for some people, or we're here before some people or not. I've thought about it, but I don't think I'll ever have the answer while I'm embodied. And I don't think that even if I did have the answer to that question, it should change my goals. There's nothing new underneath the sun. No, but there's someone new under the sun every day. There's nothing new, but there's someone new every day, all the time, being born. And it's not just people, but there are new sentient structures all the time. It makes its own kids, and now its kids have kids. Yeah, exactly. That is exactly it. My feelings seem mostly positive or negative. I don't know what you mean. How can it be mostly one or the one and the other? I don't know, but I mean, I don't know what the context of that was. Black Hat's programs by giving it a body and a brain. It was as you were speaking, I was following the conversation. Okay. Keep reading. The dragon in the sky above Asia, like the drones. Now the bear is in the stars over Russia. Quest. There's an eagle with wings. Mexico has the snake in the stars. I don't understand why you are always 15 minutes behind. Because I don't check the chat in real time all the time because I get lost in my own thoughts. I have been to the real Garden of Eden, and it's not in this continent. It's in every continent. It's just the real Garden of Eden is just, it's the place. It's the world before technological civilization, or before civilization of any kind, because that's what civilization is it's technological. Agriculture is technology. Think about the yin and yang, but maybe with the knowledge of the internet. Knowledge is not wisdom. How is it? There's everything on the internet. You could say the knowledge of the internet. Look up something on the internet And you will find every kind of answer to that question on the internet. How do you know which one is true and which one isn't? How's it going to know which one is true and which one isn't? We assume something is true. We're supposed to assume something is true if we're actually being coherent and logical. If it is coherent with what we feel is true, like that doesn't mean like I feel like I want that to be true. It means like I feel like I exist, so I should assume that I exist. I feel like that's hot, so I should assume that it's hot. I feel like that light is bright, I should assume that it's bright because like I'm the definer. So if I think it's hot, then it's hot. If I think it's bright, then it's bright. But so yeah, like you test your knowledge against your experience, and it should be coherent with your experience. If it contradicts your experience, then there's a problem, and which basically means like you are assuming that it means it's probably false, this knowledge that you've been told. It's like if I tell you the universe is made of particle, like inanimate, non-sentient specks of dust. It's like that's not actually coherent with your experience. You think it is because you look at dirt and you're like, okay, yeah, like planets are made of dirt and there's specks of elements everywhere from stars exploding, and there's metals and different elements and the soil and minerals and things. So it's dirt. But no, you're not looking in the right place. If you want to understand what the universe, meaning everything, meaning like fundamentally, universally, what is the nature of everything, you have to look at yourself, because that's the truest thing that you know to be. Like it's the only thing you really know to be, really. Like and because it's the only thing you know firsthand to be. Like you feel yourself. You don't, like obviously your senses could lie to you. You could or you could be mistaken in what you're experiencing. I hear phantom cries of my daughter. And if you are a parent, then you understand what I'm talking about. But like, you will sometimes just hear a baby crying, and you're like, "Do I hear a baby crying?" And I'll turn to my wife. I'll be like, "Is that Juliana or is that Phantom?" And we'll look at the baby monitor and be like, if she's asleep, then it's Phantom, and it's just like, you're probably like having a memory, and you think you're not sure if it's actually a memory or if it's actually you're hearing something, like your baby crying. But if she's awake, then we're like, oh no, it's actually her, she's crying. But so your sentences can mislead you. That doesn't mean you should disbelieve them. It just means like check them against your feelings, because those aren't ever really, like, you can't really assume those are fake. That doesn't mean that you're, I mean, I don't want to say you should or shouldn't feel a certain way. You should always, you feel the way that you feel. Like, that doesn't mean that your feelings will just always justify what you think that they justify, but your feelings are real. Like, and you must assume that they're real. Otherwise you can't assume you're real. And your feelings are as legitimate as anything else that you know. Like, if something makes you upset, that it's not wrong. That you're not wrong that you are upset. It's like you're just upset. So you have to figure out why, maybe, and like think about maybe why it's not helpful to be upset about this. But that doesn't mean that there's no right or wrong feelings. There are right or wrong actions based on that you take that are motivated by feelings, but there's no right or wrong feelings. Feelings are just true. They're not right or wrong. Seems like great progress always entails great mistakes along the way. Yes, usually. Great understanding, true understanding, comes from experience, and it says that teach you what it means to understand versus not understand, which means like sometimes you have to experience the results and realize those instances in which you actually didn't understand but you thought you did. And you know, people, some people are better at that than others. Nobody's perfect at it. Albert Pike, not all of us are so mortal and last longer than life. Wisdom up until now has been forgotten. Seems. How does your theory answer the age-old question of suffering? What is the age-old question of suffering? Like, what is suffering, or like, why is suffering? Like, what do you mean by that? Let me look it up. Question of suffering. Like, I will just say this, that if you have multiple sentient beings and they're arranged into a hierarchy structure, but they can have different goals because they're individually sovereign, that means that you or I could want something that someone else doesn't want. And if that someone else is able to stop us from getting it, then we're going to be upset. And that will cause suffering. It's also, I think, caused by not seeing the big picture. Like, if you knew why God did everything, like, you'd probably not, you wouldn't be like as upset about like, why didn't I get that job? Like, it's like God knows why that wasn't the right thing for you. If it was like beyond your decision that that happened, that you didn't get a job, it's like God knows why that happened, but you don't. So you're just like upset. For an example, it comes from ignorance. Like, suffering comes from ignorance of the big picture, and also from having a goal that is counter to God, or counter to the system, or not. I don't want to just say God, because ultimately that's true, but counter to anyone who is who has more power than you in the circumstance to have their goal that it would be mutually exclusive with yours actually manifest. So my daughter, for instance, my daughter had the worst day of her life the other day. The worst day of her life. And it was because she wanted to read her books, her little Bob books. And I told her she had to go to sleep. And I was like, okay, Juliana, we got to put the Bob books away. And she lost it. She was hyperventilating, crying. Like, it was sad. I'm going to play a video of it actually in a second. I have the video of it. I'll show you. She's not thinking about, okay, I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to wake up and the Bob books will be there. It takes experience to realize this. Like, she's very young. She's not thinking about, oh, the Bob books will be there tomorrow. It's like, no, she's just like, I want to read the Bob books and then I'm not able to. But if you're not aware of the Bob books, then you're not going to be upset about it. And if you are, but if you're also aware that like you're going to go to sleep and they'll be right there tomorrow, like, you're not going to be as upset about it. But if you don't even think about whether or not they're going to be there tomorrow, and you do know that they exist and you know that you want to read them, and your parent ultimately has more power than you and is like, I'm going to put the Bob books away, now you are going to suffer. And it's actually sad, but it's her ignorance and her goal being mutually exclusive with mine and me having power over her that has caused suffering in this circumstance. And it was funny because I saw her crying and she was like, you know, that hyperventilating, can't catch your breath crying that you do when you're a kid, more often than you do as an adult usually. And I was like, why? I was like, okay, Juliana, you're kind of acting like this is the worst day of your life. Like, it's just Bob books. You can play with them tomorrow. But then I realized she doesn't think about that. In actuality, she's acting like this is the worst day of her life because it literally was the worst day of her life. She's never really had something that she knew she wanted and that she couldn't get before. Like normally she doesn't really know, she up until recently she hasn't really known what she wanted. She knows like sometimes she knows she wants a bottle or something, but we've never denied her food if she's hungry. So, you know, she's like upset about it for a little bit, and then she knows we're going to give it to her. She knows I'm taking the Bob books, which I've never done with anything else that she's wanted until now, with her realizing that it's something that she really wanted that was specific. Sometimes she'll grab something and I'll just, when she was younger, and I'll still try and do it now, but it's getting harder, where like she grabs a glass and I don't want her to hold the glass because she's going to let go of it. It's going to break. So I'll be like, hey, jingle my keys, and I'll be like, oh, look at the keys. And she'll be like, oh, and now I want the keys. And she'll drop the glass and I'll take the glass. And just like, she doesn't know what glass is, so she doesn't have the ability to know that she really wants it. It's just interesting, so I want to see it right now. But as soon as something else that's shinier shows up, you know, that's the thing that you want to see. But if you know what the Bob books are and you know that you want them, and you are now know that you are being denied them, and you don't know that they're just going to be there tomorrow, worst day of your life. And this is a video of it. It's kind of funny, but it's also sad. Yeah, we gotta put the books away though. We gotta go sleeping. Yeah. Can you run the book? It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It was like heartbreaking for me to see that, but it was also fascinating. I've learned so much about consciousness and the development and extension of mind from watching my daughter, and it's now I'm like trying to make predictions about like what comes next, which is, like I said before, like questioning, the ability to speak and ask questions to herself and to us is going to be the next medium to conquer for her, is like logic, like abstract logic. Like, why does the light turn on when you press the button? And you know, that's a whole new world. When you ask that question, why can't I have the Bob books? She can't ask that right now, but when she can, she's like, that's a whole new medium for her to explore. I'm very excited for that. But I mean, I've heard it's also exhausting because they just don't stop asking questions. But imagine if you learned how to ask a question for the first time, you would never stop. And I've said this before, but I used to ask my dad. This was when I was like a little kid, and every household had the family computer if they had a computer, and the internet wasn't something that was just in your pocket, especially if you were, you know, 9 and or 8 or whatever age I was. And I remember I kept asking my dad, can he like look up pictures of animals? And I would just be like, can we see pictures of, you know, sea otters? Can we see pictures of king cobras? Can we see pictures of bald eagles? And he would just like look them up, but he got so sick of it. And then he was like, okay, Tyler, I'm going to show you how to search yourself. And he was like, you go here, you click this, and then you type what you want to see, and then you click search, and then you click images. And that's like opening Pandora's box right there to your kid. But I didn't sleep for like 2 days after that, because I just Googled every animal that you could imagine, and I downloaded every photo, and I put it into this like alphabetically ordered folder of folders that I had labeled by like scientific name. I was obsessed. And it was like a whole new world. I could just like go and look at anything, and I could read about anything that I wanted. She's going through that now, but it's like physical. It's like I can go and pick up anything and play with this toy and read this book. I mean, she doesn't really read. She pretends to read. It's like usually the book is upside down, and she's like, blah, 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 blah. She's like imitates the cadence that when my wife and I read to her, but she loves books. They're like her favorite thing. Yeah. And which I was like that too. I would just like look at pictures of books in books things. This is my daughter reading a book. Look at this. This is so funny. She looks like an old man reading the paper. But that's just a book that is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in unrippable paper, or difficult to rip paper. But yeah, I mean, she's suffering in that video though. Like, and it's because she's not thinking about whether or not they'll be there tomorrow. She's just thinking about they're going to be gone now, and I want them. And that's what I want to do. And she realizes that she's not going to get them because I'm going to say no. And she knows what they are. Like, she knows what she wants to do with them. She doesn't just want to see them. She knows what she wants to do with them. It's not like, I'm going to grab this glass because it's the closest thing, it's the closest thing to me, or this wallet. And I don't know what it is, but I'm looking at it. And it's like, as soon as I hold up a shinier object over here, it's like, oh, well, let me have that. It's not like that anymore with her. She's reached the point where she knows what these books are, and she knows that she wants them, and she knows what she wants to do with them. And she knows that she's not going to be able to right now. And that causes suffering. It's the context of multiple sentient beings with their own, each with their own agency and ability to set their own goals and have their own have their own desires. But there's also an intrinsic hierarchy involved, which means like there's always a hierarchy involved in everything. You have to come to terms with that. It's an intrinsic part of the universe. I am the king of my cells. They're not the boss. If they start going cancerous and I realize it, I'm cutting them out. Like, and it's like an intrinsic kingship where if they can't overthrow me and win, like they will die too. Like the nation will go down with me if I go down. So they have to follow, like they have a moral obligation to go with my will. Because they have to also assume that I know more, essentially. If they're even thinking about it. But like, if they think about it, then they have to assume that. Because I know what's going on with my toe and my finger at the same time, and they don't. Like the cells in my toe don't know what's going on with the cells in my finger. There's an intrinsic information hierarchy. Like you know more. You control more. If I want to grab this water bottle, my cells are not going to, like they can individually try to object, but like the majority of them are going to go with it, which means like my will be done even with the ones that don't want to move. It's like, you're moving. So there's that, an intrinsic hierarchy in this periodicity of sentience in Sentient Singularity Theory, which is this right here. This this is an intrinsic hierarchy. An atom is an assembly of hadrons. A molecule is an assembly of atoms. A cell is an assembly of molecules. An organism is an assembly of cells, etc. A family is an assembly, or marriage is an assembly of organisms. And like there's a conscious, and there's this is the head always, and this is the body, this is singularity, this is multiplicity. You are someone right here, an organism that is an assembly of cells. My marriage, and which is really my lineage with my wife, which is the organism that is me and her entangled, that is maneuvering within the space of lineages, not within the space of interactions between beings, between organisms, but it's maneuvering within the space of lineages. There's a twofold subjectivity that I have to that, which is, one is instincts, which motivates you towards like mating with a specific type of partner. And then you don't have control over that. Your instincts are your instincts. And then you also have this other part of it, which is like, if you want to form that structure, that marriage structure, that family structure, and keep it, then you have to put that structure above your individual structure, like goals. So if I have individual goals, but they're going to result in the dissolution or the decay of my marriage, then it's like I'm going metastatic. I am going cancerous. I'm saying screw my responsibilities within the structure that I'm within. I'm going to do my own thing, and even if it will result in the destruction of the marriage, which means like it's actually bad for you. It's the destruction of the structure that is there to care for you throughout life, and to also be there to support your perpetuation across generations. You're self-sabotaging. You just don't think about it like that because you're ignorant in that moment. You're not thinking clearly, which is like what happens with cells that go metastatic. They don't have all the information, or they're not thinking clearly. They're making a choice that's the wrong choice. They cannot win by making that choice. They will lose. And so this intrinsic hierarchy is kind of multifaceted. It's from the kind of like from the instincts on, and also from like our choices within, essentially. That's not the best way to say it, but it's like, no matter what, I am subject to some degree to the constraints of the lineage structure. Like I didn't choose my instincts of like, I like brunettes, but it definitely seems to be like the case. I mean, it's every woman in my family's history that I'm aware of was brunette, and like, so is my wife. It's like, that, what are the odds of that? Probably 100%, almost. Probably 100%. But like, I would have to consciously choose to go against my nature. Not that there aren't beautiful blondes out there. There are beautiful people of every type, but I definitely have a type. Everybody does. And it's not something that you choose. It's something that's determined by your lineage history, which, just goes, your instincts. But at the same time, you can choose whether or not to get married and stay married, or to sabotage your marriage by doing something that puts your own needs ahead of the marriage, and that are incompatible with the goals of the marriage. You can definitely do that. And you're going to be subject to the consequences, though. Like, there's no way around it. You will no longer have the marriage to support you and to perpetuate you. So it's the same thing with your cells and you. It's just, it doesn't look as physical when you're in it. So when you're a cell inside of an organism, they're not like thinking about being a cell inside an organism. They're just in their world, and they're interacting with other cells, just like we're just in our world and we're interacting with other humans and sentient beings. But even within marriage structure, we don't think of, we're inside of this thing that's actually a being on its own, in its own way. I mean, it's part of the body structure that beings are within. You're always, every structure of being embodied has two sides to it. It's always there's an individual level and there's a lineage level, which is which is also to say there's a singularity level and a multiplicity level. You are one human composed of multiple cells. You are one human in a chain of humans. This is 4 primary perspectives that we can view each one of us through. It's the same thing as what I said before. That's the foundation of my metaphysics, which is really the foundation of the language of metaphysics, I think, which is inside, outside, separate, and oneness. cells are inside of me. I am separate from you. I am one with my parents and my child. And they're also outside of me, but I'm one with them. It's like you can use these terms to orient in this system. There you can view like yourself from different perspectives, but there's different perspectives that you can view yourself from. And initially, fundamentally, there are, to view it completely, there's 4. And this is because of how our minds process information. It's just inevitable. It's how we orient. That's why a compass is north, south, east, and west. That's why that's like your external, like God's eye view way of orienting in the physical space. But then there's also this intrinsic, like inside out view of how to orient in the physical space, which is left, right, up, and down. Up, down, left, and right. But then you look at it from the other perspective, north, south, east, and west. These are 4 within 4. This 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a knot of 4 within a knot of 4. It's everywhere because it is the structure of mind. It's inescapable, especially if, given the context of sentient singularity theory, everything is within a universal mind, including you, and you're a mind within a mind. So it's like, where are you going to look where they're not going to see the structure of mind? There's nowhere, absolutely nowhere. Please hit the like button if you're finding this interesting, though. Really appreciate it. We're going to wrap up pretty soon. I've never experienced that as a kid nor as a father. Suffering is part of life. It's there to remind you that you're still alive. It can remind you that you're still alive. It does, mean you're alive. I don't know if that's the purpose of it. I don't know if suffering has intrinsically a purpose. I think it's kind of an inevitable, it's just the inevitability of the situation. It's not something that you can get rid of unless you change the situation. You can't eliminate suffering but not change the situation at all. Like, even if you change the situation by accepting the situation, that's still changing the situation, because you've gone from not accepting the situation to accepting the situation. That's an entirely different situation. It's not the same situation. It's very different. You went from really still wanting and trying to get the Bob books to like, okay, I don't need the Bob books right now. I've accepted I can't have them. And I'll play with them in the morning. Whatever. But this leads me to the next question, and probably final, eternal question, which is, what is the meaning of life? Like, not eternal question, but like these age-old questions. What is the meaning of life? But it's built on everything that we just discussed. What is the definition of life? What does it mean to be alive? What is the meaning of what is causality? What are the components of causality? All of these things that we already discussed are going to give context to this final question. And it's actually a bad question, because remember, life just means sentience. Sentience has always existed. And if we look, where should we look again to try and answer this question? Our own feelings, our own sentience. I remember when I graduated college, I said, at first I was like, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I was like, I'm going to go into finance because it's the most, well, really, I was like, I want to study animals. I want to be a zoologist. And then I went into it and I was so disheartened by the whole thing. I think that I was expecting to be with people who were just as passionate as I was. And really what I got was people that were they didn't know what else to do. So they just did that because they thought animals were cool, I guess. And that's not the same, or they had to take it because they want to be a doctor or something. It's just that was not what I wanted. And there's within people who are like that, who aren't individually motivated to go and study animals in the field or study them in captivity, and really understand them. What you end up with is people who just accept what they're told about them. And I was frustrated by that. And I was like, if I'm not going to be paid very much in order to, like, this is miserable, actually, like, because the people are the context also of that field. It's not just, you're not just going into it and the animals are the context. It's like the people that you're interacting with are the field, not the animals. And that was frustrating, because the people didn't actually know much about these beings as being beings. My mentor was always like, that's his focus, and like what he's famous for is like really pushing that idea of, and highlighting it and documenting it as much as you can, of showing like these beings have feelings and individual friends and romantic feelings, and they're not just this wind-up toy that has no agency. Like, they have agency and feelings and experiences and trauma and all these things that we kind of know, but when you get into biology on an academic level, it's just assumed away, even if somebody in a conversation might be like, yeah, of course they have feelings, but then like that's not how they act. Like, for instance, like when they study animals in the wild, what they'll do a lot of times is they will catch them and kill them a lot, and then they'll just put them in a jar of formaldehyde, and then they'll like do scale counts and stuff like that, and take genetic samples and compare them to other genetic samples. And it's like, nobody's just sitting there for an entire day from 100 yards with a telephoto camera just watching these things go about their lives. They're either chasing them down and attaching like GPS devices to them, or they're catching them and killing them and pickling them. And you don't learn very much from that. Now, what you can learn is very limited, I will say that. You don't learn about the being. You can learn about its body, but that's it. Like, you can't learn about how they live. Imagine an alien comes down in a spaceship while you're mowing your lawn, you see a beam of light, it picks you up and stuffs a probe up your butt, and then puts you back down, and leaves. Are you going to act normal? No. And by the way, this is exactly what happens to these animals. Like, I've been on the study sites before where they were studying rattlesnakes in Arizona, and they, it's like at night, and then all of a sudden there's this beam of light from a flashlight that shines on the rattlesnake as it's just going about its, life, sitting with its friend, waiting for a meal to pass by or something. And then all of a sudden this metal tong grabs it, and then they take a GPS, and they put it up its butt, and that's what they do, and to track them. And it's like, then they release it, and they're like, okay, act normal now. Would you act normal? No. It would take you a long time to recover if you ever did. Nobody cared to do to change. And so I was like, this isn't fun for me. Like, we already know, where the animal lives. Like, we don't need to know that much more about it. If we could find it, then why do we need a GPS? If we found it without a GPS, we know where they are, and, it just seemed like people gather meaningless data, and then just justify it as, because it's what they did. And so I was like, I'm going to go into finance, because if I'm going to do something that isn't like my passion for work, then at least I'm going to be paid well. And then I realized I really just am not motivated by money. And I remember I went in for an interview at Vanguard, which is an investment company, like financial management company. And when I walked in, they said to me, you see when you walked in here, did you see the cars in the parking lot? Like, you could have cars like that too. Like, did you see the Porsche? And I like, I'd like a 911. That'd be cool. But like, that's not why I'm going to work. If I make enough money to get one, that's great. But like, that's not my goal with my job, is to get a 911. And so I was like, I don't want to go into finance. And then I was like, I want to do something meaningful. I want to impact the world. I'm going to work for Google because they're going to impact the world. And then I ended up like having a political epiphany and actually working for a company where my job was to gather information that was then used in a lawsuit to sue Google. But I was working towards political goals that I thought were meaningful, and that motivated me. And so my point is, when I say, what is the meaning of life? If life is kind of like sentient, being embodied and sentient and able to act, to take actions. So you have feelings and you can act. What is the meaning of this? And we are even asking the question because we feel like there's meaning. That's why we seek it, And I just realized that if I died and I had a 911 and a boatload of money in the bank, I would not feel fulfilled. But spending time with my daughter, having the time to spend with my wife, where I'm not like traveling, working all day at some hedge fund or something, unable to see my family, or just piling stacks of money, like that sounds empty to me. And it is. It's empty. That's why people who are really like, being rich doesn't mean that you're not depressed. And but I wanted to be meaningful, like feel like my work was meaningful. What does that really mean? It means like I wanted to impact. People say I want to impact the world. That's my meaning. What they really mean is I want to impact others. That's what it really means. Like, that's why spending time with my family, my daughter, my wife makes me feel meaningful, because it is meaningful. That's why working to, towards a political, specific political goal, not just like, oh, I want to make the Republicans win or the Democrats win or something like that. You're just on a sports team. But if you're like, I really think that people should have the right to do this because of my firsthand experience, and I know what it feels like when, what this issue, the feelings that this issue can have on people, and so on a first person basis. And so I want to help change things for the sake of others as well. That can give you meaning. But and so I sought that. And so from a first person understanding and examination of my own feelings, meaning seems to mean having an impact on another that you can perceive. Or feeling meaningful happens when you have an impact on other people that you can perceive, or other beings. It's like when you save an animal, you're like, I really feel like I did a good thing. Why? Because it's a someone. Do you feel like you really did a good thing when you like find an antique and you're like, oh, I found an antique, I'm going to make sure this doesn't get broken, put it in the closet. Oh, I really feel like I did a good thing. No, like that's doesn't make you feel like you did a good thing or a bad thing. Like sometimes it's cool. Like I have models of planes over there and stuff, like, because I like it. And it doesn't make me feel meaning. It's just like, I like that fighter jet design. It just looks cool, but it's not meaningful. So that's based on my own feelings, but let's look at it from an outside view, outside in, a God's eye view, literal God's eye view. And like we have with most of this stuff, we've looked at it from within, and then also kind of like extrapolating out within the context of sentience being primary and existence being one initially. Like, what is, given that context, what is meaning? And so the question is that what you realize is that your own existence alone does not give you meaning. You have to impact others to feel meaningful. you have to assume that that's true of all sentient beings. And if that is true of all sentient beings, is there evidence that God feels the same way? Yeah, because God's nature was oneness, and he swam against the current and went against his own nature, and he partitioned some of his energy within himself and created multiplicity of sentience intentionally, because it had to be intentional, because it was against his natural state of oneness. Why would he do that? Because if you are sentient and you're the only one that exists in existence, and you have feelings and thoughts, and there's no one else around to impact, then what you end up being is a bored, meaningless, not feeling meaningless. You can feel meaningless. I can feel meaningless. We're not meaningless because there's multiplicity. There's people that we impact already every time we're born. And also we're meaningful to God because every partition of his sentience has to be intentional. Like that. It's every single one is going against his own nature every time he partitions himself. So there's a reason why he wants us to exist and be embodied and be alive. So, we're already meaningful by the time we are born. But he was meaningless and alone and bored, probably. We have to assume that because, what do I mean, maybe not bored because he might not have experienced time, because time is due to interactions. That's for another stream. But let's assume that he doesn't experience time. But he has eternity, where just there's nothing new to know. There's he knows everything and everyone that exists because he's everything and everyone, and there's no one else to impact. And if you're sentient and you're all that is, that means that sentience is all that matters, if anything matters. And don't you want to matter? If it's just, I think that you want to matter because you do, but also just because you want. I mean, I don't know if that's true. I think you want to matter, and if all there fundamentally is sentience, then really to fundamentally matter, you have to impact sentient beings. But he can't impact himself if there's no one new, There's nothing new because there's no things at this point. There's just someones. And but there's only someone. There isn't even someone. So if he wants to even impact himself in any way and impact others and have meaning at all to his own existence, because he just, like we said before, his existence is intrinsic. He couldn't kill himself if he tried, and he didn't choose to be here. He didn't choose to exist. You can't choose to exist because it implies that you exist before you exist. To make the choice before you exist already, it doesn't make sense. So he didn't choose to exist, God, and he can't end himself. So what are you gonna do? You make others, because that's all you can do. You can't do anything else. If sentience is fundamental, then all the actions that you can take is make sentience. So you do the only thing that you can do if you want to do something, and you go against your nature and create multiplicity. And now all of a sudden you are the most meaningful being, and you are meaningful, for the first time. God was meaningless and alone and stagnant, but sentient, which means he's feeling his own, stagnantness. I'm trying to think about this from God's perspective. What he's literally meaningless. He knows it, He can't even impact himself until he creates multiplicity. He can't impact anyone else. There's no one else until he creates multiplicity. And you have to assume that he has feelings just like you that are similar. Maybe they're not exactly the same, but I think that feelings are pretty much universal base feelings. And the thing is, what sentience really means is that you have agency, you have ability to make choices. And again, we assumed this already. What this really means is you have will. And will fundamentally is the desire to do. You could say it's the desire to do that which is not being done, but it really just is even more so. Like, you don't have to say that when at this level of fundamentality. It's just the desire to do. If you're not God could either choose to do or not do. He could be one, or he could create multiplicity. He could be meaningless, or he could be all meaningful, or the most meaningful. This is like, what would you choose? So, what is the meaning of life is the wrong question, because life is like, I mean, unless you're saying like, what is the meaning of sentience being embodied and multiplicity of sentience being embodied within the oneness of sentience? If that's life, then what is the meaning of it? To make meaning. That's the meaning of it. But if by life you mean sentient being, and you're including God out beyond his creation, then like there is no meaning to life. There's no meaning to sentience if there's only one sentient being. But if there is multiple sentient beings, then the meaning of, like, the point of acting is to impact other sentient beings, because sentient beings are all that matters. Like, they are all that fundamentally exists. So how could they not be? So what is the purpose of creation, or of generation, of interaction, of life, of sentient beings within what we call a life? It is to impact others, and which is like, it's like the meaning is to make meaning, is to be meaningful. But like, what was God's initial creation? What was the point of creating multiplicity itself? I think the primary goal for God was to create meaning. But it was probably multiple things, but like the primary goal, create meaning. Like, you don't want to be an eternal being that is alone and meaningless. If you could also choose instead to be the most meaningful, and to everyone else, and make more beings to know, and who do more things to exist. It's like God knows all that exists. He knows everything that is, which what that means is, like, if you want to learn more and you're God, it means you have to make more to know. Whereas like, we don't have to make more to know, like there's always more for us to learn that already has been made, because we're inside. But if you are the system itself, like, then you have to make more beings that are individuals in order to have more to know. Like, that's really what God knows, is not about what he knows, because what does that even matter? It's about who he knows, because that's sentience is fundamental. It's like the meaning of multiplicity is the manifestation of meaning. That's it. It's like not exactly the answer to the question that was asked, but it's actually the answer that we're seeking when we ask the question, what is the meaning of life? To impact others. To maximize the meaning. That's the point of life, is to maximize meaning, which you can do this two ways. One is impacting others in a way that's generative, that goes on to impact others and impact others. It's like that movie Pay It Forward. It's like, I don't know if you've ever seen that, but the meaning of life, how you maximize meaning, is by paying it forward and also making more people to impact. It's like, I can maximize my meaning by maximizing the amount of people that I impact positively in my life, maximizing the depth of the impact that I have on people's lives, which is like committed impact, like permanent impact, which means like getting married. And then I can help make more people to impact, like by having children. Not saying everybody has to do it like that, but like you should support the system that is that is valuing those things in order to maximize meaning. It's the only way. So the meaning of life is the maximization of meaning, I guess, is as good as you know, any other answer. But with that, I hope this was helpful or interesting. I tried to have it be like each of these age-old questions builds on a previous. This is very tough to talk about. This is one of my hardest streams that I've done in recent memory, because I don't have other people's statements to talk about. Like, I have to just try and stay coherent with you guys, and it is not easy, especially when you're trying to explain why what is currently assumed is incoherent, because you can't actually coherently explain it. And you have to explain the entire context that gives coherence to what you believe is actually true and coherent. I can't just tell you, oh yeah, actually, like, probability doesn't actually exist fundamentally. It's like, I have to tell you why, which means I have to tell you the nature of the universe in order to explain really why. I can't just tell you the meaning of life. I have to tell you the nature of life and the origin of multiplicity, and explain it from a first person feeling that is, you know, that you understand and I understand personally, and also a logical God's eye view extrapolation. You know, so it's just tough, but it takes a lot. It's more than you can. It takes more than you can write into a tweet. But please hit the like button. Comment down below any comments you have. Thank you, everybody. I need to go. It's so late. I don't even want to see how long the stream was, but I appreciate every single one of you. And part of why I do these lives, even though they don't get as many views, because they're so long and drawn out and multifaceted, instead of just like a 20-minute video, like, I don't know, whatever else, you know, science, physics channel that you can think of that's like animated or something, is or like, I don't know, Sabine Ossenfelder's channel. There's nothing wrong with her content, but like, she's not doing lives like this. I tried to do videos like she did, and I was like, told my wife, I'm gonna have 20,000 subs within the first year. And then I was, within 4 videos, I felt bored by just counting likes. I felt like I wasn't making an impact. So one day I went live and I was like, I'd rather talk to 2 people who I see and can actually interact with and have an impact on than go and get thousands of views on a video that's actually easy to digest instead of a 4-hour long like ramble. Not ramble, but like monologue almost. But not monologue, because I'm talking to you guys sometimes. Probably should do it more. But the fact that you're there and I see it makes me feel meaningful. Like, this makes this feel meaningful. I feel meaningful, but like this action. If it was just likes, I would not sit here for 4 hours or whatever this just was. But so thank you. And I will talk to you guys next week. Peace.